Excellent connection. We hope it will stay an excellent connection. Go live. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? I'm hoping this is working. I'm hoping this is working. I'm hoping very much that this is working. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? So, sorry. Best friend came around to visit, and I had everything set up before she arrived, and then it wouldn't work when I came back here. So I had it set up so I could quickly turn it on after she'd been here. So it came back out here about 5 minutes to 7, and it had all shut itself down. And then it took about a good 10, 15 minutes to get everything working again. So apologies, that one's on me. I relied on the computer system doing what it was supposed to do. Always a rookie error. Always a rookie error. So, right then, I have Iron Brew. I have treacle tart. The real important question is, do I have a fork? No, I do not have a fork, but I do have a Stanley knife, which is not at all clean. I will figure out a way to get this. But this is a very nice treacle tart. By the way, for those who don't know, I picked this up on my way home from work, and this is a lovely treacle tart from a very nice, very interesting shop called the Windsor Farm Shop. And yes, that is the Queen's own farm. So, you know, fairly decent treacle tart. Mildly gloating there. It's really, really nice. It's really well made and really proper. It's really good treacle tart. Right. So, hello, Carl Gusberg, Alwazaski, hello, Peter Dawson, hello, Michael Coach, hello, John Shea, hello, Night 6 everyone, hello, Tanaverka, hello, Steve Richards, hello, DG40, hello, Glyn Stewart. I'm distracted. Glyn, you are definitely going to want to be here because this started out going to be a general sci-fi discussion. It started out as a general sci-fi discussion, he says. It did. Then it turned into, let's talk about Glyn, because he likes to watch the channel, and, you know, he has 6 very good books, which all have different forms of battle in them, and I can talk about this, and possibly torture one of my friends a little bit. So, yeah, it's good you're here, Glyn. You deserve to be. You're going to enjoy it. Hello, Amelia Burrow. Hello, Seneca Nero. Hello, John. Hello, Colin Cameron. How are we doing? Hello, Paul from Chicago. Hello, Paul Amos. Gluten-free. They do have gluten-free options. Hello, Anna Paul. Remember, it's a party contest time. It will be fun. Hello, Duke of Beddington. Hello, James Duff. Hello. Only put in 6 books today. Yes, only 6 books, because we're going to discuss the mechanics of battle, and it's going to be a sort of general sci-fi question and discussion, and how it sort of relates to modern warfare and all those things. And so, yeah, that's going to be starting off in a bit. I would also add, I have received, I'm doing those 60-second videos now. And I do the 60-second videos for 2 reasons. 1, it gets a lot of reach, which is good for growing the channel. 2, they're quite a fun challenge. But I have just added a 3rd reason that I do them. Some of the comments you get back are absolutely amazing. Because they show just how little the people commenting know more than anything, and why they're not worth responding to. It's quite fun, when I say not worth responding to. I respond to many comments. I enjoy responding to comments. However, if you just write a string of words which basically are, "This is terrible," I just laugh. Because that's not an argument. It's funny, though. And on 60-second videos, people are more likely to use those. Which is causing me amusement. Come on, I bought your book today. I'll get it on a Saturday. Nice. And only 6 of your books, yes, Glenn. I didn't feel that it would be fair for me to go through the full panoply of your books that have space battles from this particular series. I thought if I went through all the various Avalon, Castle Federation, and Peacekeepers of Sol, I could have far too much fun. You have 1901 Iron Brew. That is good for you, IKB4472. I'm mildly jealous now. Although, I do seem to have drunk my fair share. I'd also add that I don't think Stafford intended it when he gave it to me. But the box, which he gave me when I was in Canada, which is a lovely thing, by the way, and it's just down there, has now turned into the thing I actually use when I'm doing the videos for the 60-second videos to make sure they get a purple background and nothing else. Glenshire, and that's before you get into series where I either throw out the laws of physics or made up my own. Well, it's always worth having at least one series. It's a science fiction order. There should always be at least one series where you throw out everything and make up your own. If there's not, then you just haven't been taking full advantage of the genre. And basically, I realized it was going to be this when I realized that if I started taking apart the space battles in Warhammer 40k, there were going to be a lot of very, very confused people because I'd actually be applying military logic to them. That's a great fun. You've basically just built a fantasy fleet that, if they existed, would have wiped out most things in the world, most things in its way. I.e., if the IJN is in existence as it was at Midway, and the US Navy turned up with 4 Midway and the RN with an Audacious and Implacable and a Colossus, and all that, the other attendant escort, you are talking about enough naval firepower to sink most fleets at the time. Thank you. Someone very kindly just sent me some money for new equipment, which is good because, as I said, all the money's going on the computer. You can't apply logic to 40k. That's hilarious. No, you should be able to. And I suppose something I don't require it to have externally logic, i.e. logic to our current time and current engineering and all those things, but it does have to be internally logical. And that is a problem. That is a really big problem. There's also the problem that if you're going to build super soldiers, like Space Marines, you'd better have some sort of branch of them which are serious fleet commanders who will command their ships. They need them. Because if your fleet cannot keep pace with your Marines, that is a good example of your Marines going to crash into the ground. And speaking of silly comments, I always love people who are like, the Duchy of Terror is the most realistic physics. And I'm like, literally in Chapter 2, I explicitly throw physics out. I know, which is also one of the reasons why Duchy of Terror series didn't make it into this video. Essentially, the whole problem, one of the problems I have with Space Marines and space battles is that you have some of them flying shuttles, etc., shuttlecraft. Why not space fighters being flown by Space Marines? That would make sense. Or Space Marine genus, kind of like the Clone Wars troops from Star Wars. But also, you need some serious fleet forces, and there are some serious things. Yes, I can understand the use of slave labor rather than machinery. That's not exactly sensible in my view, but I can understand. Well, virtually slave labor, let's be honest. But that's what they go with in 40k. But seriously, you're going to rely for your fleet command of the fleet that your super soldiers are going to be absolutely dependent upon for their logistics, supply, movement, everything, on squidgy organic things, which are basically the same as all the other squidgy organic things. It's kind of like going, well, yes, I invented all these superhumans, but I didn't really think through the fact that most of the operations are actually not going to involve the superhumans. They're only going to occasionally be useful when I'm actually fighting on the surface. That's true. Why was this Admiral class battlecruiser's torpedo loading system so complicated it limits how many torpedoes can be fired per salvo? Because they thought aiming was more important than number of shots. And Daniel McCall, 40k makes zero sense to me. It's why I prefer Star Trek. Well, here, let's start off with Star Trek battles, where for some reason everyone lines up on the same axis in a wall. Why would you do that? Why? Why? It's space. You can move any direction you want to. You can mass your fleet and attack from one side of the wall. Plus, I presume you have some really advanced sensors and etc. gears that can, if you have all the holographic technology, etc., that can spoof, and maybe you suggest ships are in places where they're not. It's just Star Trek and battles do not make much sense either. Sure, I thought the Astartes did have their own fleets. The Astartes do have their own fleets. They're just not crewed by Astartes. Now, certain if Sheffield Shiny Chef used every gun to sink Z16, would include mowing down Z16's crew on a deck with the air guns. If they were brought to bear, probably. Amelia Burry, your thoughts on the Battle of Basson Rift from Star Trek Nemesis? That could be an entire video on how not to run a battle. And I've missed the question you've asked. Well, yes, we are doing a sort of sci-fi themed one, and you are asking quite a lot of regular ones. Nice. Hi, Doc. Asked you earlier, would Hood sinking Bismarck with Bismarck blowing up in a cataclysmic explosion and was killing everyone aboard really be enough to get Vanguard cancelled? No, Vanguard will still get built. Might be long-term delayed. It might end up having 16-inch guns, but leave that one side. Mm-hmm. Right, so Kone in Battletech, the clans have an aerospace pilots that were bred to have better eyesight, able to tolerate more G-force X. Now that makes more sense. Thank you, Bishron. Daniel McCall, I put fleet maneuvers in most of Star Trek down to ease of animation. Yes, that is true. But the Star Trek books are not much better. Don't ask me why. So, I have an advantage. on this when I am using this book and reading these books, etc., and using the computer. I have Kindle on my computer, so I can actually read the sections I want from the computer, which helps. It really does. Now, I will say I haven't listed my favourite of the books yet. And that's going to be the 7th one, which will be added in at the end. But it's worthwhile thinking about. Sergeant Knighton, could a force from one illustrious, one downfall, one implacable, one around an RCM implacable with a strike force of around 40? Oh. Yes. Yes, if you have 134 Seafires, 87 Barracuda carrying 500-pound bombs, and 177 Barracuda with Mark 12 torpedoes, probably sink. Well, they'd probably sink Yamato, Nagato, Mutsu, and one cruiser. Whether they sink the 11 destroyers, well, that'll be depending on what's going on around Mels at the time. But they'll probably sink the major targets, or at least damage them to the point at which they'll be going home. It is fun. Alright, speaking of battleships torch, what was the point underwater torpedo tubes of battleship? It just seemed like we're supposed. What was the thinking behind it? Basically, keeping enemy battleships at bay and finishing off a ship if you needed to. And it was considered safer than having them on the deck, having them on the safer than having them on the deck. Right. Let's see. Hi, CM McDevitt. And, coffee is the greatest beverage in any universe. That does seem to be the general things with most of the science fiction. Anti-Dora class, but not ship's hull so unsuitable for carrier conversion. There's all sorts of decisions, but mostly it's because the Italians really didn't want to convert them. They didn't want to, so they didn't do it. They could have been done, but it would have taken a bit more effort. Mainly it's the superstructure and the way the hull is shaped, but yeah. And strength decks, but they're not much. They're not massively impossible. So, getting back to our topics. Space Carrier Avalon, Glyn Stewart. Now, this is a very cool book, and thanks, Pigeon, for the super chat. Thank you. The first question you have, first way sort of the battle sort of opens itself is Chapter 36. Deep Space. 0514 hours, September 19th, 27:35 Earth Standard Meridian Date Time. DSC 001 Avalon at the Executive Officer's Quarters. Carl set an alarm for well before emergence, so it took him a moment upon awakening to realize that the noise that awakened him was not a wake-up alarm. Finally, he managed to wake up enough to activate the communicator. Roberts? It's Mason, Kelly said sharply. We have a problem. Looks like a battle group has a more efficient commander than Alliance intelligence figured. Carl's upright and fully awake as that sang in. They've arrived. They've arrived, she confirmed. Standard Commonwealth battle group. 2 battleships, 2 carriers. ETA to Tranquility orbit is 3 hours. He checked the ETA clock for Avalon on his datapad, guessing what it would say. They'd arrive in Tranquility roughly 15 minutes before the Commonwealth fleet settled into orbit of the main planet. It would take them another 3 hours to reach the planet themselves, but it wouldn't matter. By that time, the Tranquility space fleet would be dead. Now that's a lot of firepower. 2 battleships and 2 carriers. So one of the things that always impresses me about these books is it does work out why these books are there. And why the ships are what their ships are. Now, to give you some backstory. The whole drive here in these ships is that the power system and the system by which they achieve fast and light travel is so expensive. It's not efficient to produce small ships. So everything gets bigger and bigger and grows bigger and bigger. So what you're looking at is battleships are multi-million ton ships, and carriers are the same. One is orientated around its armor and its weaponry to do fighting. One has slightly less armor, slightly less weaponry, but carries a lot of fighters, which themselves can't really usually do fast and light travel. No cruiser escort. No other escort, because the smaller ships aren't really worth it. It's so expensive to build these ships that with the drives to make them able to go fast and light, that there's no point building something smaller. What you'll be doing is you'll see smaller battleships rather than necessarily cruisers or smaller types of ship. Should space fleets be descended from naval forces anyway, not air forces? They're probably going to have to go. Can you explain about the book? Because I'm going to get lost. Okay. So, Space Carrier Avalon. In that the Earth has sort of spread out around the world, a galaxy. Humanity is spread, but instead of it saying as one empire, it's sort of divided into 3. There's the Terran Empire, which is based on Earth. And they are, I would say, although Glyn's here as well, I would call them a Romano-inspired culture in terms of their politics. They certainly have some very feudalistic titles, but they have a sort of a Roman Republic-esque approach to their military structure and their postings. The systems Commonwealth, well, the Commonwealth are Well, that's what the Commonwealth are. They're the sort of the Terran Empire. Then there's the other factions, which basically range from a imperialistic sort of organization, which is theoretically a monarchy, but seems to be far more pragmatic than that, and another one which is another functional sort of democracy, and a whole myriad of other smaller powers. And basically, the big empire, Earth Commonwealth, this sort of Romano group, sort of political group, keeps trying to bring back the whole of humanity under their power by force. Definition by role. So a cruiser is a ship with a mix between fighter decks and beam weapons, but still the same cubage and mass as battleships and carriers, so no escorts at all. Yeah. The role of router. If the carrier strike group is slower than vessels then striking, would that make an effective? No. So the fighters are faster in terms of sublight speed, but the carrier is able to go fast and light. Now, what is interesting is the first battle does involve a cruiser. This is the description of it. Carl was going to have a front row seat to the death of a Starfleet. They are receiving a full telemetry upload from every ship in the Tranquility Space Fleet, relayed through a QCOM link with a ground station at TSF command. He could see where each of the TSF's guard ships and the starfighters were in real time, could even contact First Admiral Wu directly aboard the cruiser Sapania. He had no intention of jogging the elbow of a man about to defend his homeworld. Looked like the TSF was going with a modified version of the original plan. The missile heavy Abihanka and the Rakshaka guard ships had assembled in a 16-ship strong force beta, hidden in the ice rings of Tranquility itself. Sapana, escorted by 200 Hurricane starfighters and the lance-armed Silda guard ships, were advancing towards the Commonwealth battle group. There was no finesse to either the defenders or attackers' approach. The Commonwealth had assembled a shield of starfighters in front of the battleships and pulled the carriers back. They had firepower across the Tranquility Space Fleet and had assembled into a giant hammer aimed at Tranquility itself. TSF really had no choice. They could defend the planet or surrender. Starfighters went out first. All told, Tranquility deployed just over 200 of the fleet little ships. The two Commonwealth heavy fleet carriers between them deployed 280 fighters. As soon as the TSF ships launched forward from their larger brethren, the missile ships using Tranquility's rings for cover opened fire with heavy capital ship missiles. 16 guard ships launched 64 missiles in a single salvo that made Carl shiver. When the missiles passed Sapana, the cruiser launched her own missiles. 18 more missiles joined the salvo, which rapidly caught up to the starfighters and passed through them just as two starfighter wings slammed into each other. Clarke could see the echoes of the same trick he'd pulled on Achilles. But this time the Commonwealth starfighters had numbers to split their attention. 80 starfighters focused on the missiles, while the remainder went head-to-head with the Tranquility equivalents. For someone watching through the scanners of other ships, from millions of kilometers away, the chaos that ensued was barely coherent. Fireball after fireball lit up the sky of Tranquility as positron lances and anti-matter missiles reaped their deadly harvest. 94 seconds after the two fighter wings reached each other, a half-dozen Tranquility ships broke through. As much by luck as anything else. Behind them, still on course for Sapana, 187 Commonwealth scimitars blasted forward. Then the second wave of 82 missiles arrived, and detonated in a single massive swarm of explosions. They didn't take out all the Commonwealth fighters, but they opened up a gaping hole in the heart of their formation. The Silver-class guard ships followed those missiles in. Distracted by the sky-shattering force of the fighter clash, Carl almost forgotten about them. The handful of starfighters that had survived the missile salvo, targeted in the center of their formation, didn't stand a chance. The 8 vessels, tiny compared to a true starship, rode their pillars of antimatter flame just as well, just as agilely as any starfighter. And where a starfighter carried a single positron lancer, the guard ships carried 10. They ripped through the remnants of the Commonwealth Center at a top speed, ignoring the 100-plus starfighters around them, even as they annihilated the handful of ships in their path. A third wave of missiles rode their exhaust plumes and followed them towards the Commonwealth battle group. In response, the two mighty battleships opened fire. Their beams couldn't reach Sapana, but they launched 40 missiles between them, all targeted on the cruiser. The positron lances slashed out into space, targeting the closing guardships and their missiles they were covering with their own hulls. Carl watched in horror, guessing without even having seen the revised plan that what the guardships were doing. Those 500,000-ton ships couldn't take a single hit from even the lighter positron lances the battleships were firing, but they could take the lasers. Used to stop missiles, and their deflectors could shunt aside the positron lancers. For a while, the missiles wouldn't have survived on their own. The fourth missile salvo, behind the guardships, ran into a slowing and preparing Commonwealth fighter shield. None of them made it through. Avalon's secondary control was silent, and Carl was certain he wasn't the only one silently saying a silent prayer for the doughty little guardships as they charged forward, dancing a writhing path across space as they tried to guard their charges and survive. Their fate was inevitable. The first died moments after the Commonwealth found the range. The battleship's massive 1.5 megaton per second positron lances could burn through the guardship's deflectors long before the guardship's quarter megaton weapons could return the favour. 4 more ships died without ever reaching the range of their enemies. 3 survivors opened fire. Beams of antimatter flicked across space, and with even the mighty kilometre-long battleships pirouetting in space to dodge their tormentors, a guardship died, then another. Then the last guardship violently blew apart. It hadn't been hit. Its deflectors were still working. The ship simply exploded. Carl was shocked, looking stunned at the screen for a moment before it hit him. The intentional detonation of the guardship's zero-point cells had saturated the space around them with an almost penetrable level of radiation, and the guardship's sacrifices had carried 20 missiles to striking distance to the Commonwealth battle group. No longer matching pace with the slower guardships, the last missiles of salvo leapt forward. Lasers and positron lances filled the air, trying to catch the radiation-concealed missiles with blind fire. The programs behind the random fire were smart, with 900 years of history behind human missiles to feed them. Blind or not, missiles began to die. Then they emerged from the radiation cloud, and Carl sucked in a sharp breath as he realized that the missiles were still there and spreading out. Of the remaining missiles, 3 were targeting each battleship, and 3 were targeting each carrier. There were only seconds before the missiles emerging visibly to Savannah's sensors and then becoming lost in a haze explosion laser fire. When haze clears, 3 ships were clearly damaged, near misses that had burnt off missile sensor armors. The forward battleship, closest to Tranquility, was shattered. A 1 gigaton antimatter missile had struck her amidships and vaporized the middle half of the ship. The broken wreck of her stern and bow were rapidly separating, driven apart by the force of the explosion. Cheers echoed at Naval's bridge, but Carl's gaze was drawn to Sapana. The dying blow of that battleship closed in on the Tranquility cruiser, accompanied by the same starfighters that destroyed every missile salvo the CSF had launched without an escort. Sapana was heavily refitted, but she was 20 years older than her enemies, smaller, less well-armoured, and less defending against missiles. She took 34 starfighters with her, but moments after the missiles closed, Avalon lost their link to the old cruiser. There you go. That's battle in space. Josh Newton, currently watching rigging at 1.25 speed. For people who say your video shorts are bad, should you be able to reply? Just tell them when they start doing videos, they can start criticizing. No. There's no point. It's going to sound strange, but I long ago developed the policy on the internet that whenever I'm doing social media and other stuff with academia, especially in history-based stuff, I will engage people who make arguments with evidence and information and discussions. But people who just go, oh, it's terrible, or it's this or that, I just don't bother. It's, in the nicest way. If you're just going to write, it's terrible, but no reason why it's terrible, or why you don't, and I'll give actual evidence to refute the argument, then you're not putting any effort into that, and therefore, why do I need to bother to put any effort into a response? I don't. Phantom, so here's a question. In naval warfare, mines are a real threat, and a lot of effort is put into sweeping them. In cyber setting, how would that be in space? Both for minefields, but also Sweden. To be a minefield could be a real issue in a sci-fi setting. Yes, it could be a massive issue in a sci-fi setting. But there is also the problem of where do you hide them? You see, mines hide by being in water, which means they're difficult to see visually. In space, Well, A, you're moving in 3 dimensions anyway, so where do you put the minefield? And B, how they gonna? And B, aren't you gonna see them coming, or rather, see them from a long way away? Now, there are ways around that. One of the interesting things I've often thought about is why not mine asteroid fields? That would certainly be what I'd do, to make the asteroid field basically an area I don't have to bother to defend, because if you go through there, there'll be a massive explosion which will tell me you're coming. Nice ignorant. I realise you're asking non-sci-fi stuff because of Formula One next week, and that's fine, but I may or may not answer it depending on what I'm talking about at the time. So, as long as you know that, because this week is a sci-fi one. But Ines, why isn't it considered that Nazi and Kaiser user-boat menaces left a deepening impact on British than they thought? They considered that they left a fairly deep impact. Hi, Dan. Right. I think a space one would be just be an astrobuilt. A multi-million-ton lump of matter traveling at sea would release more energy than all the world's nuclear weapons combined if it hit something solid. That is true. Add some mines in there and you could have fun. But cloaky mines is pretty much what Knights is true. Be worried. Be worried. Please don't start talking about Man and his fish mitre. He does honestly have one. This is the interesting point, though, that then Glynn makes in his book. Because you've just heard that battle. You've heard the Tranquility Fleet is being annihilated. They're the Allies. And Avalon would emerge. It goes on next chapter. Emerge while the battery was still occurring. But still 3 hours away. There was nothing they could do. And this is where it gets interesting. How many updated versions of the battleship is available in it? Well, as the books go on, the battleships get bigger and bigger and bigger. And they get really massive. I have to admit, by the time we get into the final book I'm going to discuss of this series, you're talking really colossal, talking ships which are just absolutely colossal. So here's the question comes up. Not the CSF, no. I don't know if I'm willing to give up on Tranquility, though. By the time we can get to equipment engagement range, they'll have rearmed their fighters and repaired any critical damage, Kelly pointed out. If we could hit them now, even in the next half hour, we could clean their clocks. Carl blinked, looking at the screen again, then back at his console. A ship had to enter Alcubierre Drive in a zone of effectively zero gravity, or risk ripping apart both themselves and any nearby fragile objects, like planets. Before the stabilizers and redirectors that Dr. Jessica Stetson had designed so long ago, did they really have to emerge like that? He hit a command. Wong, I have a question for you, Carl said calmly. No, I can't make her go faster, the chief engineer said, dryly. Next, Captain. If we push it, if we're willing to risk the ship, how close in can we merge from Alcubierre Drive? There was silence on the end of the line. Carl brought up a video to the screen to be sure that he had lost connection somewhere. The shaven-headed engineer was looking at him with unreadable dark eyes. You're serious, he finally concluded. As deaf, the acting captain told him. How close? It depends, Wong slowly, on how good a navigator we've got. Someone's going to need to put me in my chair, a tired voice said from beside Carl. But I'm good enough for this. Lieutenant Commander Maria Pendez may have been in a wheelchair and may have had Lieutenant Angela Alvarez managing to both push said wheelchair and hover, but her eyes were level and her face was determined. I should send you right back to the infirmary, Carl told her. Yes, but there's no way my assistant can thread the needle for you, she replied, her voice sharp and fiery. It can be done, Skipper. How close do you want? Wong? Carl asked, turning back to the video. The engineer shook his head, but when he looked up to meet Carl's gaze, he had determined smile on his face. If she's man enough to fly it, I'm man enough to try and hold the manipulators together. How close boils down to one question, Skipper. The engineer said calmly, do you care if this ship can fly FDL again afterwards? Commander Wong, Carl said flatly, if you can give me emergence within weapons range of those ships, I don't care if I have to carry Avalon home. Wong glanced through the video screen at Pendez. If you can thread it that fine, Lieutenant Commander, I think I can hold us together. You game? Pendez glanced past Carl to the screen where the last warships of the Tranquility Space Fleet were making a hopeless last stand, praying for rescue that even this trick wouldn't be able to bring her in time. Let's kill them. Do you find Space Battleship Yamato ridiculous? I find it very funny. I don't treat it as ridiculous, it's just funny. Dungeon, do we get more moons? Not in this one, but there is a book which does basically have war moons. Or rather, war asteroids. Most of the big ones are around at the start of the series, though. Yeah, but they do get the really big. 64 cubic kilometers is the still modern of the setting at the day. 1.8 cubic kilometers is the new modern. With space mines, I expect them to be more torpedo in a canister than in an already old-fashioned World War II contact mine. That could definitely be more likely what you'd see. In the latest bilge pumps, you talked about officers training officers, and it reminded me that was it Jellicoe that was only 3 away from Nelson? Pretty much. Royal Rooter, did Admiral Rick Rover's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson design of propulsive parts of these ships? Maybe a dark matter reactor. I think it was more his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter, but we'll leave that to one side. 0-point energy and matter-antimatter engines. Plus, some games of bosuns do really funky things with mass. Frankly, how much a problem would it be to lengthen the O3 hull and add a third shaft and engines to give more speed? Not the most difficult thing. It depends when you're doing it, though. If you're doing it before it's being built in the design phase, pipsqueak easy. If you're doing it once you've built the ship, that is going to be more complicated. Not impossible, but expensive. And so 80 cubic kilometers is the minimum. Oh, yes. I missed it. I thought it was a 1.80, but it's 1. Sorry. That was confusing me for a second. So here's the next point. At 800 meters long and 400 wide at her base, Avalon was shorter and squatter than more modern ships. With a heavy neutronium armor, however, only the latest and most massive battleships and supercarriers had eclipsed her immense mass. Combined with dozens of mass manipulators of various sizes located throughout her hull, serving so many different purposes, it took a mighty blow to make the old warship even shiver. Acting Carl Roberts' orders were making her scream. He held onto the arms of the command chair as the entire ship bucked like a drunken donkey, the air itself splitting and tearing to create the most god-awful noise. Pendez sat at a console, blank-eyed and completely linked into the ship's systems, riding the fine line between the collapsing warp bubble and ripping the ship apart from the gravitic shear, threading the needle. In engineering, Carl knew that Wong and 6 of his engineers were linked in as well. They're manually managing the Stetson stabilizers and mass manipulators, desperately trying to keep the warp bubble a little bit more stable to give Pendez that little bit more flexibility to keep them all alive. And all the man who'd ordered all their lives placed in the hands of that tiny handful of individuals could do was watch. Numbers and patterns flashed across his screen, and an emergency klaxon began to ring, and still the air around him shrieked like a dying angel. It seemed to last an eternity, even though he could do the math that told him that they would have crossed the extra distance in less than 10 minutes. It ended with a sudden shock, and the view screen in front of them lit up with the sight of Tranquility. Between them and Tranquility, directly ahead, was the surviving Commonwealth battleship. Now, I'm not going to speak as to the drive, but I am speaking as to reality in that. So much in times of sci-fi, when we're having discussion about them, it's down to one person, this. It's actually far more likely the person who makes the decision is the one person who can't do the things, that they have a whole team around them doing the various jobs to carry out the mission, but they're the captain. They've made the decisions. They're the commander. And this is the reality of what they're doing. And this is why I like this book, because, as said, it illustrates that. The captain is not magically doing everything, single-handedly. There is a reality, there is risk, there is damage, and it carries on straight away. For a moment, as his 42 starfighters were blasted off Avalon's main flight deck, Stanford thought they were going to ram straight into the battleship in their path. Engines flicked on by mental control, twisting their course away from the kilometers-long warship, and Michael spared half of a second for a sigh of relief. Deep relief. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie squadrons, he snapped over his net. His orders flying out at the speed of thought. You're with Rokos, go right to kill me a carrier. Delta, Foxtrot, you're on me. We're going left and finding the other one. The squadrons split apart smoothly, hours upon hours of both simulated and real practice and combat experience showing. What about the battleship? Rokos demanded on the private line. Michael sighed and shook his head. Like it or not, Russell, she's Avalon's problem, the CAG said softly. There was no response from the senior squadron commander, and Michael focused on the here and now. 16 starfighters followed his as they vectored right, launching engines, flaring antimatter into space as he tracked left from the Avalon's launch bay. Oh, sugar, he just cursed under his breath. The carrier must have been moving in to do search and rescue on damaged battleship. She was right there, less than 10,000 kilometers away. Take her, Michael snapped, suiting actions to words as he triggered his Falcon's positron lance. The carrier's engines were barely starting to flare to life, the ship rotating presumably present a less damaged broadside and more weapons. She never completed her rotation. 1750 kiloton a second positron lances ripped into her, and her rotation made the damage worse. The massive gaps opened in the carrier's hull as her own armor became an explosion of matter-antimatter annihilation. Then one of the positron lances ripped open the antimatter capacitors in the ship's engineering bay, and a cigar-shaped, kilometer-and-a-half-long warship vanished in the newborn sun. There's another missed fighter. Michelle missed the battleship by less than a kilometer, close enough to feel the massive ship's electromagnetic deflectors trying to shove her away. Focusing hard, she used that tiny bit of extra impetus to bounce her ship away from the Commonwealth warship and follow Rokos around towards the second carrier. This one had been hanging back, potentially providing cover for the repairs of the other two, which brought the vessel time to react. By the time the Federation fighter squadrons crossed the 50,000 kilometer mark, the carrier's weapons were active. Random walk, everybody, Rokos ordered. Prep a starfire salvo on my mark. At closing velocity of over 500 kilometers a second, random walking was complicated. Michelle threw her ship into a corkscrew, firing positron lance as she did. The carrier was beginning its own evasive maneuvers. Whoever was over there had the reflexes like a cat. A beam just missed her, the Commonwealth warship returning fire with its own positron lances, and a warning flashed up on a mental heads-up, displaying as a carrier-fired Javelin anti-fighter missiles. Missiles now, Rokos barked, and Michelle's gunner obeyed without her relaying the command. 24 starfighters salvoed 96 missiles, flashing at the carrier at over 1,000 gravities and interpenetrating the Commonwealth missiles coming the other way. Michelle's computer calmly informed her that 4 of the missiles had been targeted on her. She dismissed the Federation salvo from her thoughts and she focused on surviving. Her positron lance cut through a space in spiraling pattern that caught the first missile. But the surviving 3 scattered. The networked intelligence smart enough to at least try to evade. It wasn't smart enough to come up with a pattern of her starfighter's more capable computer couldn't crack, however, and she nabbed 2 more as they closed in. At the last second, she fired one of the Falcon's few precious decoys, cut her acceleration to 100 gravities, and threw her ECM into overdrive. The missile, confused by the high-powered jamming, went for the target where its electronic brain said she should be, the decoy. The bright light of the missile's explosion caused her mental screens to darken, and then they had darkened again. The officer on duty aboard the carrier had reacted immediately and done everything right. Missile defense had stopped dozens of the starfires. Dozens more had made it through, and Michelle's visual input darkened to pure black as over 31 gigaton explosions ripped the Commonwealth warship apart. Check in, Rokos ordered. Who'd we lose? The mental check-ins went by in a blink, and Michelle was stunned. Somehow they hadn't lost anybody. A scan showed all 24 starfighters still present. Then she expanded the range of scans and inhaled sharply. Where was Avalon? Our God in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy work be... Shut up and fire! Kelly snapped, shoving her senior assistant out of the way, grabbing the tactical console. All weapons, target the battleship and fire, she snapped into the microphone. Carl watched in horror as 20 million ton mass of the battleship grew and screamed. They couldn't possibly hit it. Automated evasion sequences would activate on both ships, engaging random vectors to avoid collision. Its linked to Avalon systems told him they're evading, twisting up to avoid a Commonwealth starship. Their prow cleared the other ship, and the starfighters blasted into space in momentary clear space in front of the carrier. Avalon rumbled as the weapons fired in anger. 12 battleship-grade positron lances ripped in the armoured hull ahead of them, an armoured hull that was drifting back into their path. He closed his eyes, but Link showed him the path. By pure fluke, two computers had chosen the same vector to dodge along, and the battleship with its more modern powerful engines was going to dodge right back into Avalon's path. They had seconds. He wasn't as fast as he had once been, but he was still linked to the battleship's computers, thinking and acting many times faster than an unlinked human. Without force, he pulled the missile batteries back into central control. Then he overrode the minimum distance safeties on the missile's 1 gigaton warheads and fired. Pendez, he bellowed. Aim for the center. Follow the missiles. Navigator didn't even hesitate. She saw the same disaster that Carl did and followed his missiles. Avalon's acceleration was a fifth of the missiles. Barely 200 gravities. Not enough to avoid a collision out, but enough to control where they hit. The battleship's defenses were active, running on automatic control. 4 of Carl's missiles were shot down, even as the positron lances tore the Commonwealth ship apart. The last 4 slammed in the center of the battleship and detonated at one. The equivalent of 4 billion tons of TNT exploding in a moment, ripping a hole clean through the immense warship and spewing white fire in every direction. That fire hadn't even begun to disperse before Pendez, with precision Carl couldn't have matched without his old implant bandwidth, took Avalon's neuronium-armored bulk into the exact center of the fireball. Carl felt as much as saw the power readings go crazy as the old ship redirected every ounce of power into the mass manipulators serving as inertial dampeners. They glided at a combined velocity of 80 kilometers a second, and he felt even Avalon's mighty armor buckle. Finally, painfully, they ripped through the wreckage, trailing far behind them. For a moment he breathed a sigh of relief, as every system on his panel began to flare a fresh red. And then the power died again. Secondary control was dark for 15 seconds. 20. Carl was about to ask who was closest to the emergency supply closet when the lights came back on. The air circulation fans began to whir again, console slowly began to boot up, and his datapad lit up with the face of his chief engineer. Sorry about that, Wong said quickly. 0 point cells tried to shut down from overload. We managed to keep enough up to reboot, but it took all of our power load for a few seconds. How bad are we? Carl asked without preamble. 20% power and rising. I'll have exterior comms back for you in a few seconds, but we won't have sensors for at least 5 minutes. What about weapons? He doesn't need to worry about powering those, Kelly interrupted grimly. We will want to see if we can still vent those areas remotely. Carl turned back to his executive officer. What? You flew us into an antimatter explosion, boss. Best of a list of bad options. It's not as if I had any ideas, let alone better ones, but even going on our forward hull that wasn't covered in neutronium, everything on our forward hull that wasn't covered in neutronium is gone. And we have fires in all of the weapons bays. I'm getting a report, she tapped the side of her head. I've got most of our people out. Venting the air is the best option. You heard, Mason, Chief? Carl said. I got her, Wong replied. I'll get my people on it. He paused, listening to someone who was on his channel. We've got comms back, he added. Get me Stanford, Carl ordered Ensign Lee, and so he tried to relax back in his chair. The young ensign nodded to him after a moment. Michael, please tell me you control the battle space, Avalon's captain asked his cab, because we are well and truly crispy over here. Boss, I'm surprised to hear your voice, Stanford replied. We still can't pick you out of the debris field from the battleship. We thought Avalon was gone, we were walking home. Carl checked what status reports they had on the flight deck. The neutronium shutters had been closed, and Hammond's note said they were welded shut, but also that he'd have them open soon. No, Cag, you aren't doing that, he said. He replied with a soft chuckle. You'll have to hang out outside for a bit until Chief Hammond gets your doors open, but the flight deck is otherwise fully operational. I hate to repeat myself, but do you have control of the battle space? Yeah, Michael replies. Yeah, we do. Scratch 2 carriers on a battleship. Carl, though I would ask that you not take the next battleship out quite so dramatically. Carl breathed with long sigh of release. I'll take that under advisement, Michael. Now I'm going to deal with repairs. Could you and your people do me the small favour of making sure those Commonwealth starfighters don't interrupt? They outnumber us 2-1, Michael pointed out. And we have missiles and a carrier to go home to. They don't. The CAG finished. I'll go see if the Terrans want to play. You want to make sure we have a ride home. I'll do that. I did say if you bothered to reply. Yeah. No, Glyn, you're still doing fairly good at maths. You're just on a live chat. This is sci-fi, and this is some of the battles from Space Carrier Avalon, which is the Castle Federation Book 1 by Glyn Stewart. Now, another reason I am focusing on Glyn's books this week is because it's a kind of unique resource. Because when I said to Glyn, jokingly, you'd better be there as it's sci-fi, and he said yes in the chat, I thought, well, how often do you get to do this? Actually answer and ask questions which actually have the author in the chat. This is what battle is like. But what is also interesting about it is it literally takes place over roughly 10 minutes. So all that discussion, all that battle thing was about 10 minutes long. Thanks, Peter Dawson, for maths help, I think. That's good. That's very good, Glyn. Hello, Mike Newman. The whole reason I'm doing sci-fi battles this week is because they actually teach us a lot. Because it allows you to debate things in the full. You're not got national ideals or or those things going on. You're just talking about the battle and command decisions. And the reality is, it's a commander having to make a decision and enacting something based on the information he has available. Carl Roberts, the acting captain of the carrier, is the acting captain because the captain has been killed in a previous battle. And as a former fighter pilot. That's his experience. That's his career. He is having to command a warship, which, yes, it's an aircraft carrier. Yes, he has the understanding of an aircraft carrier from having been its fighter pilot. But there is a whole myriad of systems aboard a carrier that he has never had to deal with before. And he's organizing it. He's leading it, but he's doing it by relying on the experts in his area. And there's quite an interesting point already been made with someone that it's on there somewhere, that you will get more automation as technology goes on, but you'll also get some jobs. It also will change the jobs that the people are having to do aboard them, and the maintenance people are having to do, and how they're having to run maintenance. Which battle? Just woke up. That is the battle. That is the Tranquility System battle from Space Carrier Avalon. Darren, Maths and Sci-Fi was can be bad. Someone worked out that the spaceships in Battletech had a density of smoke, and that the huge walking robots mechs had tinfoil thickness armor. Quite possibly. Being Wayne's World of Science and Technology, being a cantankerous old person who's been reading military sci-fi for nearly 6 years, the field is a wasteland of large objects. Yes, it is. Colin, so the captain is basically Spruance and Midway carry command wise. Yes. Actually, you have sci-fi tech. How do you repair a wall spike? What sci-fi tech do I have? Do I have the entirety of Star Trek tech? In which case, I probably just build a new one. A nice way. I probably cut out a whole section with phasers, and I then insert a whole new section that I replicate using an industrial scale replicator. VCH. I've never read any of these books. Haven't really read any sci-fi since late 80s. That's a shame, VCH. Especially as, if I remember correctly, you and Glyn were both there when we were... were you there? Yes, I think you were. Were you there? Not sure. I know Glyn was there. I'm trying to remember the names of the people which describes their various names online. But, yeah, in Buffalo. I think you were there. Not sure. Glenstrid, with an industrial scale replicator, don't we just start replicating entire battleships? King George V class, 16-inch guns, chilled. Oh, yeah. Trust me. It wouldn't be King George V class with 16-inch guns, chilled. It'll be, meet my modified G3 design. So, and this is speaking as someone who actually hasn't eaten today. We're now on to Raven's Piece. So I'll start that up now. Right, Raven's Piece. This is... How do I put this book? Okay, this is the first book I ever read of Glyn's, honestly. It was given to me a while back by my prof, told me to go read it because he thought it'd be good for a class. And it is good. And my prof was right. And I use the Peacekeepers of Soul and various other Glyn's books quite a lot now mainly because, and this is why I allowed Wayne's comment through. There is a lot of sci-fi which is frankly fun to read, but you can't use for teaching because it isn't even internal. It doesn't even ascribe to its own internal logic, let alone any actual normal logic. With Glyn's work, it definitely ascribes to its own internal logic. Sometimes it even ascribes with external logic as well. Actually, I believe we already established Star Trek had Warspite as a galaxy class. The Borg didn't invade during the mini-war because they were too scared of her. Is that her with her crew aboard or her crew not aboard? Rory, what does the rank structure on this future spaceship look like? Are those ships crewed by a mixture of enlisted officers and are there education requirements for the list? Yes, yes, and yes. And actually, Glyn gets into those. He does get into the difference between the enlisted. That's another thing I do like. Glyn is not one of those authors who suddenly thinks that everything in the future is going to be everyone can become an admiral, everyone rises up. No, it's a case of, right, and we are going to have people who are enlisted, we are going to have the people who are officers, and we're going, in this case, they have entirely different routes. If you're a fighter commander, or fleet command, or you're enlisted, etc., what you're going to do. And yes, they do all for audiobooks. So, Peacekeepers Soul. Now, this is always a great book to read because it presents a scenario of what happens when the big bad gets defeated or goes away. In this case, they have defeated the big bad by doing something pretty darn dramatic. Very, very dramatic. I won't ruin the story for anyone by revealing it, but they've done something very, very dramatic. And the ship we're talking about, Raven, is the ship escorting the ambassador and a senior officer involved in that dramatic event to the peacekeeping conference, to the peace conference that's being held afterwards by all the factions which united to drive off the big bad. And that trip itself is eventful. But when they get to the conference, it's a bit of a nightmare, as you can all imagine, with all sorts of different people showing up, claiming to be powerful, some actually being powerful, some not. All sorts of arguments ensuing. And anyway, Raven goes off with another major faction to do a little exercise in the asteroids and show off their military power. Kind of version of gunboat diplomacy by almost military Olympic Games. And they have discussions. And then they come back, they're actually ambushed. And then as they're coming back, the communications system goes dark. And this is when they realize that the communication systems everyone had been using was actually an artificial system which had been set up by the big bad, not a natural thing which they could all use. And as you can imagine, under such a circumstance, with all this happening, the whole thing goes to in a handbasket. It goes completely terrible. And this is what Raven is returning to. Raven's come back from an exercise. Everything's going nuts. She's she's returning to it. Raven's piece is the first in the Peacekeepers of Soul series. Space Carrier Avalon is the first in that series. Both are excellent books to start off with and start off a whole series. Please take a quick moment and check this link. I haven't got a link, Wayne. Anyway, I will do in a second, Wayne, after I've read it. So, the tanks were designed to make sure a human could survive 20 pseudo-gravities of thrust. The gel itself had a carefully adjustable viscosity to help the fragile human at its core absorb the thrust without blood ending up in the wrong places. Drugs were fed in via the air coming down the hose. Even the air itself was pressurized, specifically to allow the function in this circumstance. With all that, the human could survive. They couldn't function or physically act. Control the ship, the drones that moved around trying to keep it intact at this thrust, and all of that was exerted via a virtual reality space linked to the internal networks of Raven's 900 Space Division crew. This is the only way a starfighter operated, so Henry was more used to it than most of his crew. The starfighters flying escort on his ship certainly weren't going to have any problems keeping up with his battlecruiser. The ETA on his network changed the moment the acceleration hammered him into immobile uselessness. At 0.5 kps squared, the ETA had been 3 hours and 20 minutes. Now it was 2 hours and 30 minutes. It wasn't much, it might not even be enough, but it was all the time that Henry could gain by pushing his crew to their absolute limits. Most of the ships had now managed to get out of suicide range, at least, Inerka reported. I'm still seeing multiple exchanges of fire going on, but it seems to be quieting down for now. How bad, Captain? How bad, Commander? At least 15 ships are gone, the tactical officer said grimly. I'm not even sure who. Everyone is shifting IFF protocols. It's a damn mess over there, sir. We're flying right into it. What about gathering station? So far, the Restan have managed to stay out of the mess, and everyone is more than a light second away. I guess the question now is, how long until someone starts ignoring that? And whether anyone out there is still going to try and pick a fight with us, Henry said. Where are the Kozern and the Drifters? New icons flickered across his network as Inerka tried to ID ships. I can't confirm the Kozern either way. They showed up with a dreadnought and a pair of escorts, and there's enough ships still in play that I can't confirm IDs until I've managed to flag more of the beacons. The Drifter Guardian would stand out more, but she's gone. Henry swallowed. Gone? 2 dreadnoughts and the Guardian blew each other to dust bunnies before everyone got separated. Somebody's going to lose trade privileges when the report gets back to the convoys, the tactical officer noted. But there's only 4 dreadnoughts left in this mess, and they're opening up distance for each other like there's no tomorrow. What about the rest of the capital ships at Ost? He asked. They've definitely got active, but they aren't moving anywhere. I guess their job is to make sure this doesn't spill over onto the planet. And they're doing a fine job, Henry noted with an attempt at a shake of his head. The motion hurt and he quickly stopped. He might be mostly living in his brain and network right now, but his body was still very much getting crushed. Watch those dreadnoughts, Inerka. Those vectors might be away from each other, but they look like they're going to come far too close to us for my comfort. I'll watch them and try to ID them, sir, his officer replied. But one thing I can be sure of? Yes, the Kozern's dreadnought wasn't one of the ones that got wrecked, Inerka warned him. If, say, your assassin friend is looking to notch up a battlecruiser on some of the anti-grav shield weapon that's been thrown around, they could be one of the ones heading our way. Fun times. I haven't spotted the link yet, Wayne. It hasn't come through for me. Unless it's somewhere else. Let me do the other YouTube thingy and check the comments tab. Oh, hopefully this doesn't cause the whole thing to die. Sometimes it doesn't mind me doing this, sometimes it does. Be nice, be nice, be nice, be nice, be nice. Be nice, be nice, be nice, be nice, be nice. No, it hasn't showed up in the comments tab. Sorry. I was asking, what ship is the Blackburn Blackman of Space Navies? Red Dwarf is about almost ugly enough. YouTube chat does not like links to my experience. No, it doesn't. It gets very interesting with links. Sometimes it lets them through. Anyway, the whole point about this book is they are dealing with a very complicated scenario. They are dealing with a scenario which is taking place at high speed in terms of pseudo-gravities, and high speed in terms of the reality of combat. If, this is what it carries on. If the dreadnought headed towards them, wasn't trying to intercept them, they were doing an unusually poor job of it. Commander Moon, warn them off, Henry ordered grimly. Though, are we getting any comms from anyone? Most of our Shoncom protocols were subspace-based, his comms officer told him. We didn't have any radio protocols for the Londu. We just received the radio transmission from them, but my people are having a hard time deciphering it. Probably took Calmore that long to realize he didn't have a protocol, Brown's captain noted. We'll hit that dreadnought with every Vershon radio protocol we've got. If they don't break off before they enter 1 light second of us, I'll have no choice but to consider them hostile. Enough people have died today that he couldn't risk his people. If they're Kozon, we do have a radio protocol, Moon said. Same if they're Resta. We should have protocols loaded for anyone who had a dreadnought. Mass Vershon factions only had 14 captured Khemri dreadnoughts. After all, several of those were already debris today, and a notable part of him hoped that Kal Rojan's dreadnought was one of them and that the assassin had been aboard. The universe was never so helpful in his experience. Sir, we have a transmission from the ambassador, Moon reported. No response so far from the dreadnought. Play me Tvoric's message, he ordered. The video feed lit up his network a moment later, showing him Sylvia Todorovic in the cockpit of the heavy shuttle he'd sent her in. Captain, be advised that the Reston are in full panic mode, she said, bluntly. They're refusing to let any shuttles leave Gathering Station until the situation among your escorts has calmed down. Of course, this is going to actively make the situation among the escorts worse, I'm sure. This shuttle senders are giving me better data than the rest are providing, and does not look good out here. She swallowed hard, a momentary break in the mask visible only to Henry himself. The gathering is over, she said firmly. Without subspace communication, none of these people can engage in useful negotiations. I am specifically not ordering you to use force to extract us from the gathering station. If you believe that you can calm the situation out here enough to ease the rest of us paranoid, that should be preferable. That said, you have the better eyes on the mess out there. I'm authorizing you to do whatever you judge necessary to retrieve the diplomatic party from the gathering station. I take full responsibility for whatever is required. Ambassador Sylvia Todorovic, out. Apparently he'd grown on the ambassador even more than he thought. That was a blank check. One that would cover him up to and including boarding and taking the gathering station by force. He wasn't sure Thompson's people could pull that off, but it was something he'd have to keep in mind. Again, Thompson is his ground forces commander. Will tweet. That's probably better. And he wasn't... let me know the moment the dreadnought responds to us or crosses the 500,000 kilometer mark, he ordered calmly. Or if anyone else starts shooting or the rest of them make a move. No response or course adjustment from the dreadnought. Inerka confirmed. Range is 1 million kilometers and dropping rapidly. I'm detecting charge capacitors. An hour left before they reach gathering station. That was still over 6 million kilometers away. Barely a factor in the current problem. The dreadnought was closing at just over 1,500 kilometers per second, burning at 1 kps squared. Their vector wasn't directly opposite to the Raven's identical deceleration, which meant the potential hostile had a net acceleration of about 1/10 of a kilometer per second squared. They were already in missile range. Of course, a multi-minute flight time didn't leave much opportunity for surprise. Bazzoli said softly, can we adjust our course to line the grav driver up on that big ship? Not without cutting our deceleration, hugely increasing our intercept time to the gathering station and being damn obvious. We'd have to flip again, and I can only get maybe a 20th of a kps squared without the main engines. And they know it, he murmured. Maintain course, Commander Bazzoli. He ordered more clearly. Come on in, Erka, sir. We still have to let them fire the first shot, he told the broad-shouldered officer. We need to look reasonable and rational, even after the situation has gone to pot. If I may ask, sir, why? The tactical officer demanded. There's a dreadnought headed for us. Without adjusting the course, they'll pass within 100,000 kilometers of us. The money is better than even that dreadnought has already killed a ship today. Why are we playing nice when they've already killed people? The tactical officer was following his orders even as asked. There was time for the question, unless the dreadnought started launching missiles. Henry could have shut the officer down, but tactical officers became XOs, became captains. Someday down the line, Inerka might have to face the same decision. We're playing to two audiences here, Commander Inerka. Neither of them is on that dreadnought. One is, as Henry told him, one is back home. Every scrap of this today is going to be examined on our microscope, and how we react, how we do, will define how the UPSF's proposals on dealing with this new galaxy are treated. Second audience is the rest of them. They're panicking and they're afraid. We need them to start letting the diplomats go, but right now they're being too paranoid. Someone they trust has to make the move, which since the Londu ran and everyone else started shooting at each other, means us. Which means we cannot risk that trust, Commander Inaka. We all take these best hit to make us look reasonable and respectable, and then you're going to blow them into the next week. Understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The range was at 600,000 kilometers. It was a question of nerve now. Did Calrosian understand space battle well enough, or trust his captain well enough to know that the closing to 100,000 kilometers without changing his course gave him the best shot? And if he did understand that, would the terrorist turned assassin, turned right-hand man of the Kozan's ruler, have enough to hold that long? Bizarrely, Henry called the navigation officer's attention generally. We're going to hold course until they fire, and then this is what we're going to do. Now, the idea of Wayne's World of Science, the idea of dreadnoughts in space makes zero sense. Let me explain something about the dreadnought in this scenario. Basically, it's the race which were the big bad took asteroids and converted them into battleships with huge amounts of weapons and missiles all loaded on them, etc. So they're called dreadnoughts because, for want of a better word to describe them, really. Now, to an extent, they make sense in this atmosphere, in this scenario, because you're dealing with, well, the opponents who are building them were an insectoid species, and you could almost consider them sort of like a mobile anthill. Sounds like you're having fun, Starhood. A very, very, very pretty Baroque ornate anthill. Mm-hmm. So basically, it's going to sound strange, but the humans have given it a name Dreadnought because what else can they describe it as? Well, Wayne's World of Science. Under circumstances, many times you see a graduation from battlecruiser to battleship to dreadnought to and so on. Yeah, that's not what we're talking about in this case. In this case, they've looked at it and gone, well, that's not exactly a battleship, is it? Because it's an asteroid converted. It's an asteroid with engines strapped on it. So they called it a dreadnought. So I think you'll like, actually, Wayne, you'll actually like this in terms of these books, in terms of what they've got in them. Because I do agree with you, there is a bit of a, they do battlecruiser, battleship, dreadnought to super dreadnought and so on. I blame that more on Star Trek than anything else in some of their computer games. But yeah, in this case, that's not the way they are. I don't think I'm going to get through all 6 books tonight because, for starters, I haven't eaten, and I'm taking longer and I'm answering questions. But yeah, I think you'll enjoy them. And the reason I'm talking about them is they sort of debating. You're talking about something that's basically we were already talking earlier about the thing of what happens if something in an asteroid belt hits you. Well, imagine an asteroid converted into a battleship. Glinsworld. You reach my age cynicism standard. Yes. Mr. I think I used Battleship for we built a big ship with big guns and normal weapons, and Dreadnought for we melted an asteroid and spun it to create something with 200 million meters of armor. In this setting, yes. If I remember correctly, the battleships, which are described a couple of points in your books, are basically someone took a carrier hull and loaded it up with weapons instead of making it into a carrier. Flannery, Pykrete, HMS Habakkuk in space. Yes, the Dreadnought is to extend that, but they don't actually have fighters because the way they worked was they didn't have fighters in their sort of in their thing, which is kind of interesting. Now this carries on. The silence was eerie. Henry was used to the subspace comms flying all around during combat, the Vershon communicating with each other and occasionally flinging insults back and forth to Khemri. Khemri warriors were not known for being reticent and humble, after all. With the space comms gone, everything was limited by light speed and radio waves again, and the other ship wasn't bothering to respond to Raven's transmissions. I can't even get a handshake protocol, Moon admitted. I think they're Kozan, but they've shut their radio transmitters down completely. They don't want to talk to us, and they aren't aborting their intercept course, Henry concluded. Range, come on in, Urka. 300,000 kilometers, now. Henry caught himself holding his breath and released it. That was a bad idea when under 20 gravities. Eating into drugs on the tank and the virtual reality made it impossible to ignore his body to a point. They were now in weapons range. Raven could take just over 9 seconds to flip and bring the gravity drive to bear. Gravity shield, Henry asked. Online, Song replied instantly. Our capacitors are charged and we're pumping extra power into the shield to shore it up. There's only so much the shield could do with extra power, but Henry figured his engineer knew what she was doing. Range is 250,000 kilometers. That's the other thing, which you have to remember as things get more into automated and also as things become more technology-based and more psychologically based. It becomes far more important for what's up here than anything else. And therefore, one of the things I really like is good science fiction is you see some people being included who probably wouldn't actually be able to be included in a force today because, well, we don't have the technology to support them in a combat ship for starters, not reliably, but also the fact is there are still some very interesting there's some very real limitations on your ability to use those things and be part of them. But the reality is the future of most space warfare is probably going to depend on brain power. Richards, breathe as you shoot, son. Breathe. Muscles use action. Yep. Always fire as you breathe out was one of the things I was taught when I was younger. Never fire on an inhalation, always fire on an exhalation. MC Legend 13H. Hello! Range is 250,000 kilometers, Inerka noted. Should I commence a base with mover, sir? Bazzoli asked. Go ahead, Henry allowed. Keep us on course to Gathering Station. Any firing? Return fire, Henry barked. It's an unnecessary order. They'd already gone over the plan, and the timing was far too critical to wait for the captain to give the order. 6 heavy plasma guns had targeted his ship and opened fire. Each of the blasts of superheated gas hammered into his shield with enough force to vaporize his ship, only to find themselves torn apart by tidal forces. Another 8 heavy lasers fired along with them and suffered the same fate. The grav shield wasn't invincible, but the odds were in Raven's favour in any given salvo energy weapons fire. 20 missiles followed the beams and plasma bolt, and Henry had his suspicions about those missiles. While he was certain his opponent had not realized, was that Raven's heavy lasers were multi-directional. They were roughly 15% more powerful than the Khemri beams and could just as easily be fired behind the battlecruiser as forward. And the energy screen was a power hog. Just like Raven, the Dreadnought couldn't maintain the screen and fire all its heavy energy weapons without dipping into capacitor banks. Knowing that Raven had to flip to fire her main weapons, the Kozan captain had tried to steal a second salvo without draining their ship's capacitors. The lasers smashed into the Dreadnought before the screen came up. Armor could only do so much against the brute force of the energy transfer, and the armor and hull splintered under the hit. Then the 36 missiles, 3 full salvos that Inerka had pre-positioned under Raven's wings, came to life. They didn't have the 1,000 kilometers per second of the launchers, but a Kozan ship was already closing at over 1,500 kps, and they weren't targeted on the Dreadnought anyway. They weren't penetrators or conversion warheads, they were straight nukes, 500 megaton fusion warheads that intercepted the hostile missiles and self-destructed. Second salvo on the shields, we have a blow-through. Raven lurched as she spun, her crew already in acceleration tanks against the thrust that had just vanished. Plasma seared along the lower hull, creating a mirror gorge to match the missile wound on top of the ship. Firing! Their screen is lit up, Lieutenant Rao snapped. This isn't tactical officer focusing on enemy vessel. 2 of their turrets are gone, and they stopped firing half the lasers. Not sure if that's damage or lack of power. We are expecting the screen, Erica said calmly as the Raven Shields ate the third salvo plasma bolts. Henry's attention was with his tactical officer, focused on the single projectile flashing across space towards the dreadnought. A conversion round could overload the energy screen, opening the path for the lasers currently to waste energy against it. Raven hadn't fired a conversion round. Just before it would have hit the screen, the heavy grav driver round skipped an icospatial kick that moved it out of real space for a critical fraction of a second. It returned to regular space inside the dreadnought, bypassing screen and armor alike to deliver a 200 kilogram projectile traveling at 7% of the speed of light. A projectile including another 500 megaton fusion bomb. Direct internal hit, Rao barked. Target is losing power and drifting off course. Your orders, Captain? Henry studied the dreadnought in silence. Her engine stopped, her weapons had stopped. Part of him wanted to finish the job, but he was still playing to those same 2 audiences. Commander Flanagan, he said flatly, linking to his starfighters with thought. Break off and match velocity to hostile. Remove her turrets, if you please. Once that's over, leave her. Understood, Captain O'Flanagan responded. Adjusting vectors for disabling strike. The virtual bridge was silent, and Henry smiled. Well done, people. Let's get back on course for the gathering station. This gentleman wasn't the mission, after all. Damage reports were showing up on his screen, and he was glad no one could see into the tank to see his wince. Raven had got off lucky on both the hits she'd taken, but she's now basically unarmored over almost 40% of her hull, and 3 lower decks were venting into space. It was minor damage, easily fixed from onboard resources. The tanks had even protected his people from the loss of atmosphere, but 17 of his people were now stuck in their acceleration tanks until someone could retrieve them. Yeah. Wayne's World of Science Fiction. Got to read this. Not much good military science fiction out there. I am sure Glyn is hearing that and is having a great time listening to that, Wayne. I think you're going to love this. I have to say, the Peacekeeper's Soul series I use a lot in my teaching. MC Legend 13H. The lives are scheduled. Actually, I have an Excel spreadsheet from me which has the lives. If I am very, very naughty, and let's see if I can work on doing this. Yeah, there's my Excel spreadsheet. And let's see. This are the plans for what's going to come up at the beginning of September when I have to be dealing with various... This is what I do, actually. I do one of these for every month. And this is September. And this is what's going to be coming up in terms of recorded videos. I have the late 19th century cruisers. Hopefully the sound is getting through okay. And I'm not overloading things. And I have 5 ways to fix the fleet live, scheduled for the 2nd, 1939 and 1940. And the 16th, 1941 and 42. So I hope you enjoy those. I hope you're going to find them fun. And yes, you can see some of the cruisers. Basically, I'm doing a whole series on late 19th century cruisers because I realize I haven't given them much love. But, you know, I thought you'd enjoy that. There you go. That's now gone. That's right. This trick sounds similar to Stargate SG-1 when they used F-302 to jump into hyperspace for a short while to engage in merge inside the shield bubble of Anubis mothership the nuclear heat vent of the weapon. It's funny you should say that, because, and I will reveal this bit, which Glenn has told me a couple of times, Peacekeeper Soul series was inspired by Stargate Stargate to an extent, I think. In Stargate, they of course kill off the big bad, the Gwalds, and then they do nothing, and the whole anarchy descends, and all sorts of issues are there. And to an extent, this is Glenn's looking at it. Hang on, shouldn't we really have done something? What could we have done? Now, Tyrion, can we call the Type 26W high-speed U-boat an SSK? It's certainly the transition between the SSKs, as we came to understand them post-World War II, and the SSKs that have provided the majority of service throughout World War II. So it's somewhere along the line between the two. And I love this book, I have to admit, mostly because it has lines like the playing to the two audiences, etc. And this is why I'm going to carry on the reading of it, because that's the point. The battle was not the important thing of this book. The battle is not the culmination of this book. That battle, it's a do-or-die battle between a battle cruiser and a dreadnought, and it is not the important point of this book. Drones will have the decks still sealed in another 20 minutes, Song reported. We've cleared past the 6 of the acceleration tanks in the damaged zones, but we can't retrieve them until we stop accelerating. That's going to be soon enough, Henry replied. They're now inside missile range of the Restan battleship and defences of the gathering station itself. We're either going to be docking with the gathering shuttle in the next 10 minutes. After that, we should be sticking to a standing acceleration. Oh, thank God, the engineer replied. This ship is going to be a mess, sir. I know, he agreed. It was necessary. I saw the same screens you did, sir, Song said. What's the plan for the battleship in our way right now? Waiting for them to talk to me, Colonel Song, Henry replied. A blinking icon appeared on his ship, and Moon is informing me they finally sorted out the radio protocols. Good luck, Captain Wong. He snorted and dropped the channel. Link me up, Commander Moon, he ordered. He knew he'd be sending an avatar. There wasn't much need for the Reston to see him floating in the vicious, clear gel after all. It did terrible things to his hair. Captain Wong, this is Squadron Voice Takala, his old comrade in arms greeted him. Hakem Harsh. If you do not break off your course, we will open fire. I will break off my course when you release my ambassador, Henry replied. At this point, Raven was moving slowly enough that there was almost 20 minutes left in his flight time. He was 2 light seconds from the station, well out of anything except missile range. My orders are clear. No one leaves the station until I'm certain of the security and safety of my star system, Takala snapped. So you admit to holding the ambassadors hostage? Henry asked. It took 4 seconds for him to see the response to his question, and Takala may as well have been physically recalled for the success she had in concealing her emotions. Nothing of the sort, she replied, but people barely stopped shooting 20 minutes ago, Captain. As you should know, I did not pick that fight, Takala, Henry told her. I did not start any of this. But if you do not start letting the ambassadors go, we will see an all-new fight here, my friend. I have no desire to destroy Reston ships or kill Reston officers. You are my allies. Many of you are my friends. But if you hold my ambassador hostage, you become my enemy. My orders, Squadron Voice, are to do whatever is necessary to retrieve my diplomatic party. The situation out here is as stable as it is going to get. You can either let Ambassador Turovich shuttle leave, and I would suggest letting all the ambassador shuttles leave, or you can fight me. Seconds ticked by. I have my orders as well, Takala said. She was trying to speak calmly, and the extra focus of speaking in a non-native tongue probably helped, but her eyes screamed her fear. You are the commanding officer of the gathering station's defenses, he said, gently. That battleship answers to you. The station's fixed weapons report to you. Ost is 7 light minutes away. There is no time to ask permission. Squadron voice, you have to decide right here, right now. Are you going to hold the diplomats who came here trusting your people's honor hostage, or are you going to accept that the Khemri have struck one last blow and the gathering is dead where it lies? I am leaving with my ambassador, Squadron voiced T'Challa. I would far rather do so without having killed a friend. 4 seconds of transmission lag, and then the channel went dead. They cut the channel on their end, sir, Moon reported. I think T'Challa has just hung up on you. Let her think, Henry ordered. We're open to her calls right up until she starts shooting. And then, sir? Ineko asked. Then we kill her battleship and hope she sees sense after that, he said. My patience with the Vershon is running out. A minute. 2, 5, 6. Entering weapons range of the battleship, the Reston battleship, sir, Ineko reported. Any change to your orders? No, Henry said. Moon, stand by to Incoming message from T'Challa, sir, she interrupted. She put it through to his network without asking. Captain Wong, please adjust your course to pass a minimum of 50,000 kilometers from the gathering station, T'Challa instructed. We are lifting lockdown on the shuttles and transmitting holding orbits to all escort units until we arrange rendezvous for the ambassadors. Minimum distance of 300,000 kilometers will be required from all ships, but your vector will make that extremely difficult. Henry excelled in relief, then activated his own comms. Thank you, Struckman voice, he told her. You made the right decision, you know. A new green line appeared on the screen. Raven's new adjusted course. A course set to 0.3 kps squared as Bazzoli finally got to cut acceleration. I know, T'Challa acknowledged. I request that Raven remain in the orbit we are sending you to provide backup to my people until further Reston units are in position to secure the station. She held up a green-skinned hand. It is only a request, Captain Wong, but it would be great. It would be appreciated. I am more than willing to honour a request from a friend, Henry replied. We'll need the time to finish our repairs before we can skip away anyway. She excelled. Home then for you? Without subsonic comms, the Vershon are done. Henry told her, putting into words what everyone in the system had to have realised. When we cannot even talk to you without a 4-week turnaround, any alliance becomes difficult at best. Trade is possible, and I'm sure the diplomats will return in time, T'Challa countered. But you put it well before. The Khemri and their defeat have destroyed us in turn. We never knew they held that weapon, and they have ended our alliance with it. Without the Vershon, it falls to each power to maintain order around it, he said. I trust your people to be just. I can't say the same for others. Nor can I, but that is the future we face, the Reston told him. I thank you, Captain Wong. Others might have been less patient. Enough blood was shed today, Henry replied. I'll not shed one more drop than it needed. That is a great example of naval diplomacy. That is exactly the point that was being made the whole way through the book. You are not just fighting a battle. I see this in so much science fiction. I see this in so much historical fiction. All they're worried about is fighting the battle, not how the fighting the battle is going to be perceived. And real-world commanders always have to worry about how the fighting is going to be perceived. Always have to worry about what the national audience is going to feel back home when they look over the battle and what the international audience is going to perceive. This is always a big factor in it. It's one of the reasons why Mirza Kabir does question it. One of the reasons why the British hold their punches to an extent in Mirza Kabir. Churchill might not like it, but Somerville makes the right decisions because he needs it to be perceived the correct way. The British need to be perceived as strong, but they also they cannot afford to be seen as bad as the others. It cannot be a case where the British are considered just another bad guy. As for sure. Well, Stargate is the Egyptian mythology with serial numbers fought off, so it's all fair. Egyptian and Norse mythology, remember the Asgard. What if the French fleet in Mirza Kabir chose to join the Allies? The Allies would have been very happy with that. Very, very happy with that. O2 at 7% of C. That's the speed of light. Nuclear burst nuclear burst charge just seems like unneeded overkill. I will say one thing about Glynn's books. He always likes to make sure his enemies are dead when they get hit. It's never just a case of there's just enough to kill you. No, there will be more than enough to kill you. What sci-fi should be best representation of the Wix class cruise of the 1890s? I might get into that when I talk about the Esmeralda, which is of course the first of the Elswick class cruisers. I might add that in as a little thing to discuss about that one. I'm saying, what does the Aussie assessment of the Oliver Hazard Perry class, I'm presuming, as a second rate escort that falls short of the light destroyer requirements on virtually every respect, tell you about their view of the Oliver Hazard Perrys? That they were escort frigates. That's what they were designed for, and that's what they are. Aaron, you say overkill. I say better be generous. Yeah. Sure, I believe I've been accused of gigantophilia with regards to warheads. Yeah. Yeah. There are many things we could accuse you of with regards to warheads, Glenn. Many, many things. You do like them big. Nicest way, some of your warheads which devastate ships could devastate a planet. And I would also add, there is one of those discussions during this actual during this book series, and it's one of the things I think doesn't reveal too much more. Technically, the human space forces are banned from carrying as a rule. They can fabricate for required circumstances, but they don't carry as standard anti-planetary weapons. This I consider rather strange, considering the sheer firepower of their anti-ship missiles, which with nuclear warheads could probably crack a planet quite happily. And that's before we get on to the graviton driver, which they have, which runs the full length of the hull. All these things can be used to destroy planets quite successfully. That discussion made me think of Alexandria rather than Mesopotamia. It should do. But actually, it's both. I was asking, had to check Amazon because it's a wee bit unobtainium in her product. Clint Stewart, how many science fiction series have you actually produced? Canon 6 so far. Many, many books. He has produced many, many books, of which I am the proud owner of many, many of them. Disturbingly proud owner of many, many of them. Let me check. Ah, yes, Battle Group Avalon is the next one. So let me just get that up. Back to my library. Battle Group Avalon. I like this one. Ah, yes. Let's see, which battle shall I go for in this one? Because I've got notes about both to go from. Right then. Every neural implant on Avalon's bridge was displaying the timer. With 5 minutes before emergence, the last few members of the bridge crew were filtering into the room in response to blaring battle station's alarm. Pendez? Carl said, questioning. We're on schedule, on target, she told him. Her eyes glazed over as she controlled the immense carry through her implants. All ships in Battle Group Avalon also report on schedule and on target, as do Battle Group Zhenghe and Battle Group Cameroon. We have 4 minutes, 22 seconds from emergence. Now. Thank you, told her, then opened a channel to engineering. Commander Wong, what's our status? All systems go, Senior Fleet Commander Alistair Wong reported. Chain-headed engineer was technically senior to the ship's executive officer, though the arcane rules of chain of command actually put him under Anderson if something horrible happened to Carl. We have spun up all the 0-point cells. Positron capacitors are at sufficient levels for instant engagement with all weapon systems. Please try not to break my ship, Captain. I believe it's my ship, Commander, Carl pointed out. That's what the Captain always thinks, and he's always wrong, the engineer groused. Tell it to the Navy, Wong, the captain told him. The engineer chuckled, but didn't stop him cutting the channel as he flipped his attention to the starfighters, opening a channel to Michael Stanford's command starfighter. Cag, are you ready to fly? Got the chiefs around the birds, kicking tires and poking at engines, the Vice Commodore replied. Michael, your Falcons don't have tires, Carl replied, and poking anti-manticore engines is a really bad idea. So, with all due respect, I do not question my chief petty officers when they tell me what they're doing, Stanford replied virtuously. SFG 001 is cleared and ready for action, he concluded. I've checked in with the other CAGs as well. All Battle Group 7-2 Starfighter groups are cleared and ready for action. Give us a target and we will rip it to shreds. Thank you, CAG, Carl told him, turning his attention back to his bridge. Commander Zhu? Yes, sir. Technical status. All sensors, computers, and weapons are online and reporting correctly, the Dark-haired officer replied. I have a 12Q probe spread ready to launch as soon as we emerge. Good, carry on. The cycle for his officers complete. Carl glanced back at the timer. 2 minutes. He brought up the tactical plot, showing for it. There wasn't much on the plot just yet. Only the system's 11 planets. Most importantly, the 5th planet. Fair, home to roughly 2.25 billion people. Another 30-odd million were scattered around the star system in various orbitals and asteroid habitats, highlighted on the plot as best intelligence could locate them. But to control an inhabited system inevitably went to the people who held the habitable planet. Icons on the plot marked where the 3 battle groups of 7th Fleet were intended to merge. Outside the point where Fire's gravity well would froth Albuquerque drives, within roughly a light minute of each other, any capital ships would be in fair orbit, best place to defend the planet. Alcubierre Stetson emergency in 30 seconds, Penders announced. All right, Carl replied, turning his attention back to people and scanning the bridge around him. Everyone look ready? The other ship's captains all reported ready? Let's make the Commonwealth wish they never come to Fred, right? Now, no answer. Oh, yes, but if you want to conquer the planet, you need more precision. And since the interhuman wars were fought over planets they wanted to keep, yeah, I suppose. But also, hang on, to hit a ship is going to be quite precise at the ranges and distances you're talking about, but we'll leave that to one side. Okay, but nukes don't want problem in space, so bigger is better. They work by pushing atmosphere out of the way fast, very fast. There's no atmosphere in space, so you need to slap a bigger than expected warhead on there. Yeah. Then it helps. In Scattered Stars, you have multiphasic jammer. Has anyone tried to negate the jammer with their own, you can cancel out the wave? Also, can you give us some hints about the Soul-Fed fleet? Glenn Stewart's answer. Colonial Database is basically the Creative Commons license for technology. So it's either really old stuff or they've been created so often people have made it available for free. And the multiphasic jammer is basically space magic plot device to just justify space fighters. Not going to pretend otherwise. Yeah, that's fine. The fighters are cool. Ingenious Han, has the Games Workshop explained why the Mechanicus doesn't make more Glorian battleships? Battleships are the Primarchs, but can maintain or repair the existing ones used by a handful of the founding chapters. Plot devices, I think. Right. In a flash of blue Chernoff radiation, Avalon reappeared in normal universe. Fractions a second later, the light from her compatriots emerges, all 15,000 kilometers away. To provide a safety margin, reached her. The icons of the two cruisers and a battleship materializing on Carl's plot as the computers confer their presence. New green icons flash down to the plot moments later as QCOM-equipped probes blast away from each of the four ships at 1,000 gravities, sweeping deep into the system and relaying instant data back to their motherships. What are we seeing, Lieutenant Commander? He asked softly. He would only see icons on his plot once Zoo's team had reviewed the data, with copious amounts of help from the ship's AI, and assessed the reliability of what they're seeing. Old light still, she pointed out necessary. They come out of FTL 24 million kilometers from the planet. It'd be 37 minutes before the first probes blasted past the planet at 20,000 kilometers a second to give them their first close look at fear, and over 52 minutes before any of the probes permanently settled in orbit. But, she continued, we've got some clarity on what's in orbit. Looks like they set up a full defense network. 4 large red icons lit up in orbit, followed by hundreds of small ones. I've got 4 Zion-class platforms and 200 missile launch platforms. That's the same defenses Zahn had been equipped with, plus a few extra missile satellites. 7th Fleet could take that in their sleep. Damn, the Zoo cut off his thought. 2 more large red icons lit up in orbit, followed by some smaller icons. I got 2 capital ships in orbit, still resolving volume, but energy signatures suggest they're both 20 million tons. I'm also reading a 50 fighter combat space patrol. Damn, Carl echoed. That meant either both volcanoes, or one of the volcanoes and the Saint from the ship's intelligence had identified. Let me know as you break down size and details. The Saint would be a handful, but in many ways, it'd be more of a headache if it was to 2 heavy carriers. 600 starfighters was more than any of 7th Fleet's free subgroups carried, and starfighters were fast enough that they might manage to pin one battle group down. Any word on the rest of the fleet? He asked calmly. Just got the QCOM confirmation. Anderson injected, dropping them onto the plot now. 8 more green icons flashed on the screen, split into the 2 other subgroups of 7th Fleet, both exactly on target. Orders, sir? Pennes asked. For now, keep an eye on the bogies in orbit and try to tell me if we have a battleship and a carrier or 2 carriers on our hands. Gal told his people. Maria, set our course towards Fear, but take it nice and slow. I'm going to raise the flag and see what the Admiral wants to do. Sometimes, yeah, SGC never really had a dedicated gunship. Well, the BC 304s were pretty darn good. Well, they did most of the work. And frankly, they were building up. Basically, Stargate is in an interesting scenario because they get drawing their tech from free sources. And what they scavenge off the world, their own human tech and development and evolution, and Asgardian tech, and to an extent, again, ancient tech, so I suppose fourth source, I gather. And it's building the best they can from that. And once you've got a lot of different tech from different sources, you're going to need quite a big ship to make it all work together, because you're going to need a lot of things which manage the interface between those techs. And that's the thing. You can't really build a small ship unless you're building from homogeneous tech. Or at least tech which can actually discuss with each other. So that's why I think they end up with the Daedalus class battlecruisers. And honestly, I could see them working on building those up. I wasn't sure if I'd asked this before, but if the Anson subclass admirals have been around and refitted, what would replace their 6-inch guns? Depends when they're replaced, but either 4.5s or 5.25s. Probably 4.5s. As light propagated in and Q probes shot out across the system, it was something of a relief for Myra to sink into the all-captains link and apply multiple brains problems. Should we jump back into the Alcuba area, concentrate our forces, Force Commander Aleppo said. Asked if there's a pair of volcanoes, we could be in serious trouble. Any of the battle groups should be able to handle even 600 starfighters, Lord Captain Anders pointed out. If they sent all 600 starfighters straight at one of the battle groups, they'd be knowingly sacrificing their carriers for only an even chance of doing damage to us. It's a chance to do damage they won't otherwise have, Force Commander Roberts pointed out. Even if that's a saint, a pair of them could be a handful of for any of our subgroups. I suggest we consolidate our forces and avoid the risk. You want to avoid risk? Anders said. Despite what everyone seems to think, I tend to reserve suicidal options for when we have no choice, Mira's boyfriend pointed out. I don't see a point in taking a risk we don't need to. There's another risk you're all missing, Rear Admiral Anders told them, and an opportunity. If we keep our forces divided, we can all but guarantee that those ships will not escape. It is a risk, she admitted, but to take down 2/3 of the remaining modern units in the sector, I think it's worth it. We'll expand our coverage, she continued, and remain outside the gravity zones to open a possibility of an FTL intercept if needed. They don't have the forces to stop us retaking Fear, people, so let's see what additional advantage we can take today. Yes, ma'am, Roberts and Anders conceded in unison. Captain, Commander Rose interrupted the conversation to get Mira's attention. It's definitely 2 volcanoes. They've just launched their birds and are assembling a full 60 squadron strike. 60 Commonwealth squadrons was the full 600 fighter capacity of 2 volcano carriers, plus the 4 Xeon platforms. The Terrans used a 10 starfighter squadron instead of the 8-ship formation the Alliance powers used. Thank you, Commander. Mira told her, then returned to all captain's channel. My tactical officer tells me they're pulling together their birds for an all-or-nothing strike. I guess to cover the carrier's retreat. Rough on the starfighters, Roberts noted, but Terran starfighter crews are the same hot dog breed as ours. They'd carry out their mission. Get our starfighters in space, Alistair's ordered. Let's keep our options as wide as we can. It's interesting. The efforts of several million Federation sellers worth of mass manipulators did their best to reduce the impact of firing Michael's starfighter out the launch tube at 4,000 gravities. It still felt like being stepped on by a giant and took the breath out of his entire 3-person crew away, but he had all 240 of his fighters in space in a little over a minute. Courageous and Indomitable had fewer fighters to launch, getting all their birds into space in the same time frame. Intercept those starfighters, Roberts ordered harshly in his ear. They've gone all or nothing, Michael. There are 600 ships headed for 7-3, and Aleppo has less than 200 to meet them. Michael ran the numbers through his implant. It was going to be tight for his people, and there was no way 7-1's fighters could get there in time. Understood, he replied crisply to Roberts, then pulled out all the CAGs onto a network, running numbers through his implant and his starfighters' computers. He assembled his orders. FG 001, Courageous Wing, Indomitable Wing. I'm downloading a course to you now. We need to get on that intercept now. Even at our best acceleration, we're only going to intercept them a few minutes before they hit 7-3. Even as he gave the order, he was twisting his own starfighter and bringing up the engines. A Falcon was an expensive, finely tuned machine. It leapt from a standing start to 500 gravities acceleration instantly. The 336 starfighters of Battle Group 7-2, Avalon, joined him instantly. They were cutting the line, accelerating to a point between Zheng He and the Terran scimitars. With the geometry as it was, their missile range would be almost 3 million kilometers, and they'd launch while the scimitars were 4 million kilometers clear of Zheng He and her escorts. Force Commander Aleppo, he said quietly, opening a channel to Zheng He's captain. I need you to give me more distance. Play for time right now. They'll hit you before we take them out. If we evade, we cannot prevent the carriers escaping, Aleppo replied. This is not the mission. I have a plan for those carriers, Michael replied. You won't be intercepting much of anyone if your battleship takes a few dozen javelins to the nose. There was a pause. Then Rear Admiral Alstairs came on the channel. He's right, Force Commander, 7th Fleet CO told him. Keep them cut off if you can, but I'm not prepared to lose ships today. Understand me? Yes, ma'am, the trade factor captain had conceded. We're evading. Michael breathed a sigh of relief as Zheng He and her companions started moving away from the starfighters at 230 gravities and reworked his numbers. Now they had time. The extra time was enough that he could even coordinate Battle Group 7-1 starfighters for a combined strike. But he had a better idea for 7-1's birds. Vice Commodore Bakan, he addressed the commander of Grizzly's fighter group, the senior CAG in the Battle Group 7-1. I want you to take your birds and catch those carriers. They're maneuvering to try and evade Zheng He, and they'll maneuver to evade you. But you've got twice their acceleration, and they sent everybody out to try and buy themselves time. Let's make sure that purchase doesn't clear. Get me? Yes, sir, Vice Commodore Gopinfa Bakan, promoted in the last 2 months like the rest of Grizzly's senior officers, and hence junior to Avalon's CAG, despite their sharing a rank, replied, Our Imperial friends have a few extra missiles to introduce them to. Thank you, Vice Commodore, told her. Michael told her, then turned his attention to CAG from the other Yassine class carrying his own fleet, the one with 600 fighters bearing down it. Vice Commodore Olzonish, he addressed Gabriel Olzonish, Polar Bear's CAG. I'm flipping you a course. Double check my math, but I have you holding position for 35 minutes before accelerating to meet the Terrans at max acceleration. A moment passed and Olzonish spoke. I got the same numbers, she said calmly. That will give us a combined time on target salvos if we start the adjusted course at the right moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael addressed his flight crews. This system's names means freedom. Let's give it back to these people. It's good. Now, this is the point I would like to make about this. On this particular book and these particular books. Glyn actually has it so, and my favourite of all the books is not this one, it's not the other ones, and you can imagine how this battle's going to go. But the reality is, you get presented with a battle scenario which is realistic. The commanders are making realistic decisions. They're not risking things for the sake of risking things. They're actually doing a realistic battle. You're not just charging in for fun and glory and so it looks cool. You're doing the realistic thing. Terrans appeared to have guessed his plans, Michael noted. Once all three fighter formations were in space, 7-2 birds accelerating hard for an intercept, 7-1 chasing the carrier, 7-3s holding position while their motherships ran, there wasn't any hiding his maneuvers. That's the reality of space combat, not hiding your maneuvers. Hundreds of antimatter drives firing at 500 gravities made one of an energy signature, and the Terrans had probably already seeded the system with Q probes. If the Commonwealth officers had any clever ideas, he'd be seeing them shortly. Minutes ticked away. His own fighter wing was still over 40 minutes from intercept, and Terrans were easily an hour away from Zheng He and her battle group. 7-1's fighters were a few more minutes behind the volcanoes as the two big carriers ran. Admiral Alstairs' warships were behind them, barely maintaining distance, but opening up with long-range missile salvos. Those first salvos would close with the carriers well before his own ships caught up with the scimitars. Zheng He's battle group was losing ground against the carriers, but still cutting off their easiest escape. Aleppo's people were launching as well, and their missiles were going to be the first of the 7th Fleet's weapons to arrive on target. Their positions had pushed the Commonwealth carriers onto a non-optimal vector, leaving them needing to travel almost 70 light seconds to clear the gravity wells around them. 7-1 starfighters would only get one good missile salvo in, but the capital ship missiles would have almost 30 minutes to pound them. Not that the battle group Cameroon had the magazines for that kind of sustained fire. He watched the icons move around on the tactical plot in his implants. If something came up, he could maneuver the fleet starfighters in moments. With the enemy still millions of kilometers away, that was unlikely. The Commonwealth fighter force was still on course. Michael doubted whoever was in command thought that Vice Commander Ozinish fighters were going to stay in place. There was no chance of the Terrans defeating his people in detail. They did have more starfighters than Michael and Ozinish did combined. But the Commonwealth had received a number of salutary lessons in what had happened when 6th generation fighters met 7th generation craft in anything resembling even numbers. If they wanted to be stupid, Avalon's CAG didn't mind, but he wondered what he was missing. On Mira's bridge, that's the flagship's bridge, Mira watched the ammunition counters for her battlecruiser's ammunition stocks evaporate like water on a hot summer day. Every 22 seconds, Battlegroup 7-1 ship sent another 34 missiles after the carriers. They had already launched over 20 salvos, and she glanced at a link to Admiral Alice's. "Ma'am," she said quietly to the Dark Channel, "the Imperials had fired off almost half of their magazines." 7th Fleet could replenish those magazines. Cameron carried the mass manipulators, the only truly difficult to manufacture part, for 5 times the number of missiles her magazines could hold. A fabricator shops could turn the appropriate raw materials into as many new missile chassis as she needed, and her 0-point cells could charge a functionally infinite number of positron warheads. All of that took time. Enough time that the capacity was rarely used to any significant degree. Rebuilding half of their magazines could take a week. A week Operation Rising Star didn't have to build it into its timetables. "Cease fire after 20 salvos," Alistair's ordered on a wider channel. Alistair won't support. "You're right," she noted on her private channel, Myra. "I forgot that the Imperial ships had smaller magazines. Thank you." "Think the missiles will achieve anything?" Mira asked the Admiral quietly. "We'll find out in 30 minutes, she replied. "Keep your people on the Ghost Q probes. Final telemetry can make all the difference." "Yes, ma'am," Cameron's captain replied, without noting that the Admiral was giving ship captain orders, not fleet commander orders. Alistair knew that already. Mira was watching 10 salvos that Zheng Hei's battle group had launched first. Between those and 7-1's missiles, the volcanoes would be under fire for another 15 minutes, followed up shortly afterwards by their starfighters' missiles. The volcanoes were big, modern warships, the best the Commonwealth had. Mira figured that they had better have an even chance of making it out, but they were going to have to work for it. "There go Oslish fighters," Kira Rose noted aloud. 12 minutes to missile launch range for both fighter groups. "What are your orbital platforms doing?" Myra asked. In all the confusion, she almost forgotten about 200 platforms, 600 missile launchers in orbit. "Nothing," Rose said. "They're launch fighters and then nothing." "That makes no sense. Admiral, are you seeing anything on the orbital platforms?" "No. They're silent. What are Q-pros showing?" "Pulling up now," told them. Starless voice. "What?" "The fighter platforms are venting. I'm seeing, I'd say, at least 10 to 12 different breaches on each line. Looks like multiple internal explosions." "Sabotage," Cameron's captain replies. "No wonder those carriers are running. Bombs must have started going off as soon as we showed up in this internet. They are having a bad day." "My heart bleeds," Rose told her. "First of 7 freeze missiles should be hitting their defenses now." "Show me," Mira ordered. There were enough Q-probes scattered around the system now to give them nearly real-time data on their salvos as they charged in. As the missiles closed in on the 2 carriers, it was quickly apparent why they hadn't been launching missiles back at the Alliance ships. A Volcano's 12 missile launchers wouldn't do much against the defenses of a 4-ship battle group. 24 missiles detonating in the middle of even a 56 missile salvo, however, would make a lot of a dent. Well, half of the salvo vanished in those balls of fire, and then a second set of 24 missiles slammed into Remainder. Only 2 missiles made it through the missile screen. The carriers had thrown up, and they didn't stand a chance against prepared defenses of 2 modern carriers. Second salvo died similarly, none of them making it through the missile screen. When the third salvo of 56 missiles died entirely in the same trick, Mira wondered what was going on and checked the telemetry. Force Commander Aleppo was specifically maneuvering the missiles to hit the screen the Terrans had set up. The 4th salvo followed suit, and Mira saw the trade factor officer's plan. The 5th salvo dove straight into the middle of a massive hole the suicidal sacrifice to compatriots had opened up. Shielded by the radiation of the early explosions and their own jammers, they sliced through the missile screen without losing a single weapon. The Volcano's defenses opened fire, sweeping space with lasers and positron beams. They stopped every missile, barely. The closest was less than a kilometer from the nearest carrier before it died, and the Volcano looked the worse for wear of the impact. Their missile screen swept back in and wiped the 6th and 7th salvos. The 8th died well clear of the carriers, but the 9th crept a bit closer, creating a radiation wave that covered the arrival last salvo from Zheng Hei's battle group. Over 500 missiles had detonated around the Commonwealth ships now, and the radiation storm filling the space between them was immense. High-powered radar swept through the storm, picking out missiles and allowing lasers and positron beams to wipe them from space. For a moment, Mara thought it would be enough for them. Almost 600 missiles thrown in exchange for one near miss, then 4 missiles detonated simultaneously. Not destroyed by defenses, but self-destruct by Laura Aleppo herself. 8 missiles shot through the new radiation cloud, shielded almost all the way to the enemy. 5 still died too far away to do damage. The defensive systems of the 20 million ton carrier were smart, responsive, and powerful. Even almost blinded, they killed 5 of those last 8 missiles. 2 detonated almost point blank range, stripping sensors and defensive lasers from the hulls of both carriers. The last hit the closer carrier further away along its length and detonated, a 1 gigaton flash of white light that visibly moved a 60 million cubic meter ship already traveling at 2% of the speed of light. When light faded, the volcano was incredibly still there, a massive gaping wound that opened in the big ship's side, but she's still accelerating. Still running? Rose, Mira said quietly. 50 seconds, ma'am. The tactical officer replied, a voice equally quiet. Then it's my turn. We've opened the way for you, Aleppo told Mira over the channel. Give him hell. With pleasure, ma'am, Cameron's captain replied, then passed on the sentiment to Rose. Tactical officer smiled coldly. Don't worry, ma'am. I intend to put the Vice Commodore Bacan out of target. Then both women's attention was focused on the missiles. While the bandwidth to and from the Q probes wasn't sufficient for Rose to send the missiles fully updated telemetry, it was enough for her to feed them new orders. Orders the Jackhammer's AIs tried doggedly to carry out. Rose expended the battle group Cameron's first 3 salvos exactly the same way Aleppo had, intentionally blasting the missile screen out of her way. A 4th salvo charged into the teeth of the volcano's defenses, spread wide, then detonated on their own as the carrier's defenses lashed out. The 5th drove through that cloud, crossing almost a third of the volcano's defensive range in cover of her sister's deaths, and charged straight at the carriers. Once again, the empty space around the column of heavy carriers lit up with fire. The one hit Zheng He had landed had clearly hurt its victims. The defensive fire was far weaker and sparser than it had been, but Rose had only 34 missiles a salvo, not 56. Her 5th salvo died far closer to the carriers than Terrans would have liked. Blast waves and radiation swept over the carriers, more defenses and targeting scanners failing, and Battle Group 701's 6th salvo was right on its heels. 3 missiles made it through, everything the Commonwealth ships threw at them, and the damaged carrier vanished in a triple ball of flame. Cheers echoed around Carrier's bridge, and Myra bared her teeth in excitement, watching as Rose neatly guided their 7th salvo in. The excitement faded in order of respect as the big volcano pirouetted, dodged, they drew their missiles in and lashed out every weapon at disposal, and stopped 34 missiles, and then, to Mira's shock, did it again. Clever boy, she heard Rose murmur, but you're not clever enough. Missiles came apart in balls of fire as Fleet Commander Kira Rose fed new orders to nano-circuitry brains of a 10th missile salvo. Some were killed by the enemy, some were self-destructed, slamming hammers of fire, tracing a swirling path through space all the way to the Terran carrier. Captain Mira Solas had access to Rose's consoles, the reporting communications from missiles, and the Q probes Rose was transmitting her orders through, and Mira had no idea how many missiles the tactical officer delivered to the target at last. It was enough. The swirling path of fire intersected the big carrier, and the volcano came apart in shocking white flame. Target destroyed, Rose announced. Hello, RN Study, aka KGV. How you doing? Daniel is around somewhere. So, that is the battle. There are still the fighters to be dealt with, etc., and various other things, but there you go. You can have distance, you can have sensors, and you can do everything right. I have to say that battle to me, to an extent, to me reminds me a bit of Prince of Wales and Repulse. That ship does everything right, and it still gets sunk. And that's kind of Repulse. Does everything right, still gets sunk. Still gets lost. And now it's the Peacekeeper Initiative time. Yeah, I'm only going to get through 4 of these books, not 6. I gave them 20 minutes each in my plan because I thought that would be it, and it's actually turned out to be more like closer to 40 minutes each. Mm-hmm. some point I'm going to have to ask that one. Now, this next one I'm going to read you is going to be the reality of dealing with forces which are coming in from above you. And this is from the Peacekeeper Initiative, Peacekeeper Soul Book 2. And after I've gone through this, it's going to be roughly 10 o'clock, and I'm going to go and get some food because I have only eaten all day this lovely treacle tart, which was lovely, but it's all gone now, and I probably should actually have some solid food. Probably, he says. Probably. And I'm getting messages from my family, which is, "Have you finished yet? And when are you going to and when are you getting food?" Just responding that. Okay. Gunfire was generally considered a bad sign at trade negotiations. Colonel Henry Wong wasn't actively part of the negotiations either, which allowed him to focus on the distant sound. Several of the local security officers standing watch by the conference room's two entrances were doing the same thing, which was not a positive sign. Fine. The tall starship captain was seated on one side of the surprisingly plain table in an almost gaudily decorated room. The table was plain wood, probably local to Tano, the planet they were negotiating with, and barely large enough for the 8 people sitting around it. The room itself was painted a deep red colour, with gold filigree picking out detailed murals on the wall. The murals told an ancient story, but the story their presence told was the one Henry Wong cared about. The gold mural told a Kenmari story, one belonging to the history of the alien empire that once ruled Tano and had abandoned the world 14 months earlier. 6 local officials from Tano's newborn government were seated facing the United Planet Space Force officer and his companion Sylvia Torrich, a gaunt and sharp-edged member of the United Planets Alliance Diplomatic Corps. And a woman in charge of diplomats assigned to the grandiosely named UPA Peacekeeper Initiative. At this point, the civilians around the table had finally noticed the gunfire, and Henry turned his attention to them with a thin smile. "Chemical-powered firearms," he told them in Chem. None of the locals spoke English or Mandarin, and he didn't speak any of their native languages. There were 3 species represented across the table. But Tano had been a Khemri slave world. All the negotiators spoke Chem, the language of their conquerors and Terra's enemies. That was the language of negotiation, and the language Henry questioned them in now. "That is a lot of shooting," Henry continued. "Precision required of speaking a language that wasn't native to anyone in the room. What is going on?" The Tano military representative wasn't from a species Henry knew, but the tall woman with the apparently natural purple hair and the almost dainty tusks was a type of species common across the galaxy. General Kanza was Ashal, which basically meant she could pass for human in a dark alley. "We do not know," she admitted as she rose to her feet. "I'm receiving reports from the units across the city that we are under attack." She tapped a black piece of plastic in her ear, indicating that she had an active comm set. "I'm requesting reinforcements from the other cities, but I'm also receiving reports of sabotage at our airports and transport and terminals." "Commander Thompson, local forces appear under attack. Can you and the IoT sort out what's going on from orbit?" Henry had the pure message assembled in his internal network, while the local officer was still speaking, firing off to his ground div commander and his executive officer without even blinking. The locals didn't appear to have internal networks. Henry understood that the majority of the population was a shoal, which made those implants something the UPA could trade with them. Who is attacking, Todovich reminded. You did not mention any potential threat, because we did not know of one here, the senior 10 officer official named Imar, and Ashal that really could pass human snapped. The Kozun have been threatening us, but they have no soldiers on our world. If it was Kozun, there would be more energy guns, Cancer snapped. My apologies, Gunner Ambassador. I suggest we suspend negotiations for now. Tanner's government is still fragile, and despite our efforts to represent everyone on the council, there are elements that feel they were robbed. Fewer mouths to feed, another Tanner official whose name Henry hadn't caught muttered. We swore to serve all of Tanner in bar and accounted. Ambassador, Henry asked, turning to look at Todovich. She was a practiced ambassador and easily capable of concealing her emotions from almost enemy. Henry, on the other hand, had to learn to read microexpressions to be able to follow Ashal emotion. Unlike most, Todovich had to learn to control those too. But she and Henry had been through worse than this together. He was learning to read her despite everything she could do. She was amused. If the gunner of Tanner does not feel they can guarantee our security, it would, of course, be wiser to suspend the meeting for now, she told them. None of the attacks so far have threatened the centre, Kanza told them. Tanner's government centre was former home of the Kenry governor, now the home base of the planet's government. It was also the building they were all sitting in. We have a number of satellite facilities in the city under attack, and it appears that our ability to bring troops in the city is almost non-existent until we have completed significant repairs. General Kanzer is responsible for security, Imbar said. Must allow her to do her job if nothing else. Of course, Todovich agreed. We'll return to the suite you assigned us and wait an update. It's bad, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Tatanka Ioki's response had been taken longer than Henry had hoped. Presumed his executive officer was using the time productively. Even though he heard Ioki's voice, that was an illusion created by his network. Every airport or spaceport on the planet has been bombed. Probably repairable in short order, but out right now. I'd say you've got at least 8 active attacks on the city itself, pinning down local forces in their barracks. They're removing pieces from the board and heading for checkmate, Commander Alex Thompson added. Grounded the officer's message arriving in a slightly different mental tone. Kenry Governor's House, or whatever they call it, they're going to hit it next, and they're going to hit it hard. I recommend immediate extraction. General, is the centre secure? Henry asked. He processed his subordinate's comments. The dark-skinned and black-haired Chinese-American officer's concern was getting sharper by the second, and from Todovich's glance back to him, the diplomat was picking up on it. What's going on? She demanded suddenly via their networks. Sense of sharpness the blonde woman projected was more than merely physical, after all. Thompson thinks the attacks are a decoy, Henry replied, his mental voice equally silent. Kanza looked at the politician starting mill around, then gestured for him to follow her as she stepped out in the hole. Like the conference room itself, it was painted a deep red and gold, carried a gold mural on the wall. What little furniture he could see, though, was plain and made of the local wood. There was definitely not the style of the artisan case Kemri who tended to govern the slave worlds. Beings that would never accept something plain if something decorative could do the same job. Locals had left the Kemri walls in place but replaced all the furniture with their own work. The walls would probably follow, but Tanner's leaders had their priorities so far. The centre should be secure, Kanza told him. They were clear once they were clear of politicians. She looked askance at Todovich following Henry, but didn't argue. But this is a blatant attempt to decoy force away from us, and I cannot even stop it. Every mobile unit in the street is rushing to reinforce their home barracks. I have held what troops we have at the centre here, but the centre is a standardized structure. At least in its bones and hardware, Henry confirmed. The Kozun would know their way through a Kenry governor's house, if there are any here. The Kozun had been one of the Version rebel factions against the Cambry Empire allied with humanity. Now they appeared to be the close example of warlords UPA was expecting to rise from wreckage of the half-abandoned empire. My intelligence was that at least 100 Kozun special forces were infiltrated onto Tano while they were threatening the council, Kanza told them. They're almost certainly coming here, and they'll be better equipped and better trained than my people. My best people serve the Kemri as slave soldiers. They're not trusted the capital yet, and they now lack functional airports. The rest of your people, what? Rebels turn police? Todovich asked. Yes, Kanza admitted shortly after the moment of silence. I have several hundred soldiers in Palace to guard the centre, but I have less than a dozen energy weapons and limited heavy arms to support them. Why are you telling us this? The diplomat said. Should you not be briefing the rest of the council? They have no armies hidden away that can save us, Kanza said bluntly. I have not seen one of your battlecruisers in action, Colonel Wong, Ambassador Todovich, but I understand that you do carry a ground detachment. I hope that man who ended the Kenmarad can help us. Henry wanted to grimace. He's mostly past the PTSD nightmares now, but he still didn't like to be reminded that it was his old ship that had wiped out. I'm not repeating that because I'm not revealing the story. I'm strongly discouraged from interfering in local planetary affairs, he noted. Ambassador Todovich? They'd walked through the gathering and the end of the Vershon rebel alliance together. She knew what he was asking for, just as he knew she was going to give it to him. The evidence does suggest that this is an attack, not a legitimate local uprising, the ambassador said calmly. An external attack very much falls under the purview of our objectives and your orders, Colonel Wong. Speaking for the diplomatic corps, I would formally request that you assist in projecting local centre of government if at all possible. Henry smiled and bowed slightly to Kanza. You heard my ambassador, he told her. Now I have one question. Asked Colonel. What is the chance that the Kozon have launched all this chaos on the surface and do not have a space component to the attack, he asked. We have some defenses, but the Khemri took their ships when they left. Kansas told him, after some other problems, orbital platforms and a small fighter fleet are all I have. If they can position orbital support, Tano falls. Henry finished for her. Understood. I need to get to a landing pad. Then General Kanza. Afraid I do not understand, Colonel. My grounded troops will be coming down on shuttles, and then I'll be returning to Tet Raven aboard one of those shuttles. Come on, speaking of food, did the package arrive in presentable form? I haven't received the package yet. I only got back Saturday, and honestly, my mum and sister have been busy with dealing with other things, so they haven't passed the package on to me, but the package has arrived at the house. If a refit Hood had sunk Bismarck as described in the air battleship, a battle Christiansand, I mentioned a while back, with an RDF and secondary gun out, her aircraft cutter was destroyed and damage to her deck and superstructure. How would she get away? If she's moving half her speed, if it do not with a slight list, and the cruise marine spending several days traveling, trying and failing to sink her? Take care, Glyn. And, well, probably she'd get away because the nicest way the Royal Navy probably surround her with as much of a task group as they could get. Every single ship they could get would be around her. Richards, your muscles love that protein. I mean, look, I do enjoy protein, but I also enjoy occasionally a treacle tart. It's my treat for having been in charge of many, many teenagers for the last week. I love the job. Don't get me wrong, it's always fun. But I work roughly 22 hours a day when I'm in charge of them. And I do that for roughly 6 days straight in total hours. And yeah, when I come home, if I come home, every time I come home via the same route. As a rule, because I'm coming from far north of London to south of London. And I tend to avoid the M25, especially on days when there's a rail strike and it's Friday night. So I go round, and one of the places I always stop is Windsor Great Park, because it's a nice place to stop. You can get nice food. It's a nice calm place. It's not like a regular stopping sort of place on the motorway. You know, there's a decent car park, and the people are good. The food's good, and you're not surrounded by people who, frankly, are just so stressed by driving that they are not at all in their best form of mind. And so you wander around, and I tend to pick up some plants for my mum and sister. Hence, we got some new roses to put in the garden. And I tend to pick up a pie for myself, or rather a treacle tart. Now, this is where you get into the realities of space fighting, and this is the reality. I am one of those people who's kind of skeptical over transporters, but leaving that to one side. Here is Henry. I should never have left Ravenry, Henry muttered to Todovich as they reached the landing pad. He was speaking in English, reasonably confident that locals couldn't understand him. I could have had Thompson's people on the ground 10 minutes ago. If you could have had the ground division down here 10 minutes ago, don't you think Aoki and Thompson would have at least asked if they should drop? Civilian counterpart said with a chuckle. You have a good crew, Henry. I still should be on my ship, not playing diplomat. How many times did you play diplomat during the war, Henry, she asked, or watch your captain or task group commander do it? It's part of your job, and it's only going to get and be more so in this new initiative. Your new initiative, she reminded him. You helped get there, he countered, but she was right. It had taken both of them to get him in front of the United Planets Alliance Security Council. Most people gave him credit for the formation of the Peacekeeper Initiative. He was just glad no one had tried to promote him to command it. You have a weight with these people that I don't. Just having you present helps. And we didn't expect an attack. You'll be in space soon enough, my friend. They could hear the distant rumble of descending shuttles now, and Henry shook his head. Sighing, he removed his holstered gun from the weapons belt and the Tanner guards had given him back, and offered it to Todovich. Take this, he told her. It's a Kenry energy weapon. Better than anything the Kozon or the locals have. It was a consort sidearm once. My ground of troopers had it re-gripped for me a long time ago. I want it back, he stressed, but it should keep you alive. The platinum inlaid energy pistol was a classic product of artisan case Khemri creating something for their Camarade parents, both beautiful and extremely functional. Henry found the Khemri taste gaudy, but even he had to admit the gun was pretty. I'm a terrible shot, even with these, Todovich told him, but she took the weapon anyway. I'll bring it back, I promise. If it's a choice between you or the gun, remember I'd rather get you back, Henry said with a flat chuckle. Why, Captain? I'm flattered, she replied. I might also almost think you like me. The shuttles were thundering down. The conversation carried as much as through their internal networks as allowed. You're a good friend, Sylvia, he told her. Stay alive. Thompson understands his priorities. Listen to him. I will, she promised. Then an explosion took out the northern perimeter wall, and more shooting started. The attackers had probably been trying to get into the center before the human soldiers landed. If that had been their plan, they'd underestimated the armament of the United States Planet Space Force assault shuttle. Two of the three shuttles continued their descent, engines flaring to shed their last velocity. The last shuttle's engines lit up like newborn suns, halting the spacecraft in midair as the new control surfaces took shape on its flanks. Hovering in the air, the craft rotated and opened fire. Explosive shells walked their way along the wrecked wall. Henry couldn't see what was going on, but he could imagine the people trying to charge the breach were enjoying the incoming fire. Two new suns appeared beneath the shuttle. Low-yield ground attack missiles flashed down at the targets beneath the shuttle. A moment later, Henry picked out distant figures, barely more than dots, as the ground division troopers started rappelling down from the hovering shuttle. The explosion probably hadn't been the only string to the attacker's bow, but that attack was definitely blunted. As Shuttle 1 was obliterating the attack, Shuttles 2 and 3 touched down in front of Henry. He shook his head as he identified the two spacecraft in front of him and watched the ground div companies deploy in rapid order. What? Todovich asked. Take a wild guess, Ambassador, which shuttle Commander Thompson is on? He asked. She looked at the grey armoured troops spreading out to form a perimeter around the shuttles. He just rappelled into the middle of the assault, didn't he? She replied. Bingo! Henry waved to the closest of his ground division lieutenant commanders over to him. Lieutenant Commander Rocker, report, he ordered. Adriano Rocker commanded Raven's second company of ground division troops, the second most senior ground division officer aboard Henry's battlecruiser. Company 2 and Company 3 are on the ground, she reported crisply. Scans suggest several concentrations of life signs near the center walls, but there's a high likelihood that any individual concentration is civilian. No preemptive strikes, Henry agreed. It was an order, but it was only confirming what the officer was already telling him. Your officers are Chem fluent, yes? He asked. He knew the two lieutenant commanders would be. There were non-Chem speaking officers in the UPSF, but few of Rocker's rank or above, and even fewer in the Peacekeeper Initiative. 92% of the battalion troopers can at least ask for the direction, the officer replied brightly. All the officers are fluent. Good. Switch to Khemri language and wave the local officer. Name and rank? Captain Instal, the Ashal officer replied. That was one thing Henry noted. There had been 3 speeches in the council, and he'd seen at least 2 more around, but every race he'd seen on Tano had been Ashal. Humanoids, some more distinctive than others. It was a broad grouping, by any standards you cared to apply. Humans were Ashal, after all. Captain Instal, this is a Lieutenant Commander Rocker, second in command of my ground forces. Can you link her in with General Kanter and whoever is in command here? We have 3 UPA troopers on the scene, but Commander Thompson is neutralizing the attack over there. He waved in the direction of the breach and the still hovering shuttle. General Kanter, the officer paused, clearly passing his code slowly. Left comms with you, for you to coordinate. From Captain Instal's halting Ken, communication might not be as smooth as Henry's hoping, but a local was holding out a box of earpieces that looked like they'd fit humans. I'll leave you with General Kanter and Captain Install, he told Rocker. I need to return to Raven. Take Shuttle 2, Rocker urged. Best pilot you're going to find outside of a starfight, sir. We haven't seen anti-air yet. And Henry replied, and Lieutenant Commander? Sir, make sure you've got at least a fire team with the Ambassador at all times. She remained down here to negotiate once the situation resolved. He'd like to haul her back aboard Raven with him and lock her in an acceleration tank. His ship's acceleration tanks are probably the safest place in the entire star system right now. Unfortunately, there was no way he was winning that argument, and he wasn't going to try. Are you good, Commander? He asked Rocker. I've linked with Thompson and Kanza. She replied, North Wall is secure. Company 1 is moving to sweep the outer perimeter, while Shuttle 1 provides overhead. I don't know who's out there, sir, but Ground Div has the scene. These people will be fine. Play nice, Commander, he muttered. Good luck. With a final nod to Dvorovich, she set off for Shuttle 2. He'd be 1,000 times more comfortable on the bridge of a battlecruiser than in the middle of a ground battle. There you go. And that'll be the last one we'll do today, because as I said, I'm going for food at 10 o'clock-ish. That was the Peacekeeper Initiative that was from. Mikey Newman, your book ride this week. Very much looking forward to reading it. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you. Richards, good work, Doctor. You're one heck of a committed dude. Lol, when you said you teach Clausewitz, I nearly fell out of my chair. Nerves are still discipline of a Grecian hero. And nearly come. Yes, teaching Clausewitz is fun. It teaches you to cry a lot, sometimes reading it, and trying to read it read it in the actual German is beyond belief. My German is not that great, but I gave it a go anyway because I felt I should do, as I've told on this channel before. And I'm always open about this because I think it's important to be open about these things so that people who have them and other troubles know that they can still get on and do things. I'm dyslexic. When I was going through schooling, my school ascribed to a theory that if you were a bad enough dyslexic in English, or a different enough dyslexic, and I'm a very rare form of dyslexia, then you obviously shouldn't do foreign languages. And I have to admit, at the time, yeah, it was a whole debate and fight. And the thing was, whilst I liked German enough, I might have tried it. French, as much as I enjoyed French, it was a funny thing because with the French teacher, I got on really well with them outside of the classroom. Inside the classroom, we could butt heads on anything, but outside the classroom, they were one of the greatest teachers to go to for advice and to chat. And after I dropped French, I would still go and talk to them regularly and chat and get life advice and talk to them about life. That was the really strange thing. Don't ask me why inside the classroom we didn't get on. When we were teaching, supposed to be teaching, we didn't get on. I can't be forced into. Are your books sold enough to have any else online? Not quite. But so, dyslexia is fun. But this means that haven't done foreign language training since I was about 13. And therefore, which is really strange because in primary school, which is what you did, which is what schooling below 11 and below is technically called in the UK. Primary school, and then you go to secondary school, which is, well, for me, was 11 and above, but some people don't go to still 13. I did Latin, I did French, I did German, and I did a bit of Spanish as well. I really loved the Latin and ancient Greek as well. We did Latin and ancient Greek classes. Honest, this has been most enjoyable. I really look forward to the next installments. There will be more because I like these books. I like using them as discussion points, and I like using them as the interesting points. That book, Peacekeepers Initiative, I use that. I use the whole Peacekeeper series as a good way to discuss what you're doing in a grey war scenario. When you're teaching a class and you want to take them out of the current grey war scenarios and you want to take them out of thinking about, this opponent or that opponent and this scenario and that scenario, you take them into a sci-fi scenario and you go, right then, so we're starting off here and this is the scenario you're dealing with. You're dealing with this scenario where you are having to fight a battle against a very powerful opponent, but you have to think about how you're doing it because you've got your national audience and you've got the international audience. You've got to think about how they're going to interpret what you're doing. How you can't do necessarily the easy option. The easy option might be to use your firepower to blast that target away at long range. You can do that. But as Wong put it in the Raven's piece, the first book of the series, sometimes you have to take the first shot just to preserve your status as a trusted power. And in this scenario, the captain's best place in a battle is to be on the ship. That's where the captain needs to be. But for diplomacy, the captain will sometimes have to lead the ship, have to be a presence, have to be someone visible. And that means that goes up. Richards, so how many languages do you speak? Now that's an interesting question. Because I have a slight amendment. I might not have learnt languages, but I did formally, but I did carry on learning languages in a specific trace. I am fairly good at translating technical engineering documents in a fairly large range of languages because I speak also engineering fluently, which allows me to tend to work out what that language is meaning and be able to translate it. And I speak engineering fluently because I grew up in an engineering family and I needed to learn engineering to understand them. And one of the things that always annoyed them was that, and still do I get chucked up by various members of the family, that I should have gone in, I sort of let down the family by not going into engineering and by going in history. And my point is that as much as I love engineering and taking systems apart, I wanted to work on understand the largest system that's ever been conceived by humankind, which is humankind itself. I became a historian. Autism is a super weapon on the right spectrum. Autism is good. Dyslexia is good. To be honest, dyslexia can be a skill. I do sometimes. There are annoying things, like on the video the other day where I got Kriegsmarine spelt wrong. Think about how many times I write Kriegsmarine and it's fine. And I flipped letters around and I didn't notice. And of course, Microsoft Office never notices. But yeah. So this is what I do. And yeah, I know this series. This has gone from being a science fiction strikes again to a Glyn Richardson side. Glyn Stewart's science fiction strikes again. Sorry, Glyn Richardson was my old history professor. This is the trouble with having two Glyns. I quote quite often. But Glyn is good, and Glyn's books are good, and they bring up a lot of real world scenarios that you can. It's worthwhile considering. Right then. So I'm going to do for the last 10 minutes or so. Any questions? There is someone making noise outside. I'm presuming that's my sister. Wayne's World of Science on. Any time the family tells you not to do something you love, ignore them unless they're a serial killer. To be fair, most of my family don't tell me that. Lynn is an excellent writer. I feel kind of honoured that he looks at the channel as often as he does. Yeah, being a dyslexic, I can read for England, but I can't spell for love nor money. That was the thing that confused my school about my dyslexia. Because I was reading at a level well above my peers. And could read very happily well above my peers. And I could speak verbally. I'm good at presentations. I'm good at talking to people verbally. But my handwriting was atrocious. To the extent that at one point, I was accused by one teacher of lying about what books I was reading, until the headmistress, well, not the headmistress, the sort of, it's going to sound strange. We had a headmaster who was in charge of the whole school, but we had a sort of headmistress who was in charge of the really young section of the primary school. And she quizzed me about the books verbally instead of making me looking at the written report and asking about it. And she went, well, yeah, he's read these books and he's read other books. About 10 minutes, sis. So, okay. And it was a case of, okay, what's going on? And I even had one memorable moment where I was basically accused of being lazy. And then the next week, my educational psychologist report came through, and this was a very we lucked out. We got the educational psychologist who'd been former head of a whole huge area, and was basically one of the national experts on it, and is still, I think, to stay wandering around, and is still one of the national experts on dyslexia and what it is. And I spent a good 4 hours with him talking away things. It was quite funny because after the first hour, he said, "You really like model trains, don't you?" I went, "Yeah, I like model trains. I like history." He said, "Right, and we'll go through to my model railway, and we'll carry on the testing sort of in there." So I went, and he was literally talking through the trains with me. He'd seen my handwriting and everything, and he was talking through the trains with me. I was listening to the history and that stuff I was discussing about them, and talking it through. And it turned out that I am, still am, I always will be, a certain type of dyslexic. It's a part of dyslexia called short-term memory dyslexia. And it comes coupled with dysgraphia in my case. Dysgraphia is bad handwriting, but basically bad handwriting is caused by a particular form of dyslexia I have. I have no functioning, really short-term memory. Everything has to function through my long-term memory. So, I'm basically a computer which has no RAM, but has really, really fast, solid state hard drive to respond to. And it doesn't have the RAM to assist with some of the processing. Now, if I can slow down my processor a bit, the hard drive can keep up, and you won't notice. Which is one of the reasons why I'm good at typing on a computer and all those things. But if I'm trying to handwrite it, all I do is I end up with basically a squiggly line and pains in my arms because my hands can't keep up with my brain, which is fun. Surprisingly, it comes coupled with fairly decent fine motor controls, which you wouldn't think. But again, it's because you clock down your processor while doing the fine motor controls, and therefore the RAM, the hard drive, solid state sort of hard drive memory, helps actually the muscle memory and makes it better. But there are some things which I have to be really careful when doing, because if I do them without thinking, I will muck them up. Because my brain will it just sends off the signals and it doesn't have anything to store it. So it's a scenario to deal with. You work out how to deal with it. You have your coping mechanisms. I very shortly after diagnosis moved on to my secondary school, which I started at 11. And after a year of being there, they turned around and said, "We can't mentor you. We find it difficult dealing with your version of dyslexia and working out how we're going to support you. So what we want you to do instead is we want you to be a mentor and help other kids, as we think you're helping others will help you help yourself," which I did. And that was how I basically sorted out my problem, by becoming a teacher. And that's where I got the bug of passing on knowledge. So it all works. I was diagnosed when I was 11. Up until that point, they weren't sure. They didn't think I was it. Good luck. Fluffy research assistant wants to walk and down, and the elevators are out. Good luck, Wayne. Come on. My primary school did not so many languages. Did not do languages unlike docs, and got 2 years compulsory French at high school. Yeah, well, you see, the primary schools in the UK, especially some of the older ones, like languages. They're a fun thing to do. Georgian, audio went wonky for a second. I think that's when I had the Excel spreadsheet there. So, now you know why I have the two main bad voices. Helps me get down on paper because the hard drive can probably access around. Richards, how old are you, Doctor? Uh, let's put it this way. At last birthday, I was halfway between 20 and exactly halfway between 20 and 50. That was my last birthday. Next birthday, I suddenly get closer to 50 than 20. Hello, Melanie. So I went through this. Oh, 24 roughly years ago. It worked. I survived. Mm-hmm. Wait, what? Could I steal a copy of your spreadsheet? Amazon Organized Amoeba. I'll probably post a link to it. I'll probably PDF and post a link to it put it on the commentary page, so you'll see what's happening over the September period. Because I said I've got a lot of birthdays and things coming up in September, and things I've got to be running around for. So I've just sort of decided, right, in the first 2 weeks, I'm going to put up a load of recorded videos, and you're going to get lives when I'm either in a place where I have reliable internet connection. Richards, you're far ahead of me then. At the moment, I haven't managed to accomplish kids or even. Well, I've had a few quite long relationships, but nothing that's stuck so far, sadly. Who knows? The trouble is, I think, and this will sound terrible, but I'm a bit niche for most people. Let's be honest. It's going to take a lot to put up with the fact that probably a good third of any house I ever end up in is going to be filled with books. Hi, Sean. Aaron does your form affect reading? Like, can you read through a book quickly but have no memory exactly of it until a short time later? Remember, it's almost a picture me. Usually I have to read. If I read a book 3 times, I'll pretty much remember everything from the book. It can sometimes be a bit disjointed, and sometimes I need to work into my way into the book, so I'll sort of remember something's wrong at the beginning, and then I correct myself and go, hang on, that's not right, it's that. But as a rule, if I read a book 3 times, I've got it there. But I need to read it 3 times. The first one doesn't really work. Yeah. Mrs. Drac and Mr. and Mrs. Drac, they are a very wonderful couple and a great pair of friends. I have to admit, it's you have when you see them together, you realize quite how lucky both are to have found each other. It's a really good relationship. It's also quite scary. Oh, but they're great friends and they're really, really loyal. They come over and help me with some of the stuff we have over here, and I'm always offering to help them when they need me. Wayne, that wouldn't surprise me knowing you. That would not surprise me. I think the other trouble for me is, and this is sound terrible, is I spend most of my life with people I'm either in charge of or responsible for, and if you're in those categories, I don't look at you that way automatically. I have been pre-programmed from birth to be a protector, And I do not look. If I'm in charge of you, if I am responsible for you in any way, shape, or form, as far as I'm concerned, all any of you have is heads, hands, and feet. Oh, yeah, that's because the swords are, well, the swords are somewhere else. We'll leave that one side. Yes, I've read all the shelves on the books on those shelves up there a few times over. And all the books on the shelves now down there, because I've now got the shelves in down below, which is why lots of books have disappeared from up here. And there's even more books arriving. This is another reason I go to Justin Craig. They're wonderful people, and the tutors turn up and bring me books. Right, thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to say thank you for being here this evening, and I'm going to say toodles because I'm going to go sort out some food. I'm hungry. Take care, everyone, and thank you. So, let's start going through. Thank you, George Newman, Stafford Thompson, Richards, 9681, Carl Gasberg, Alzaski DG40, and John Shea. Thank you, Melly1640. Thank you, Sean Quigley. Thank you, Glenn Stewart, of course, for the amazing books he's provided that allowed us to. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Paul Amos. Thank you, everyone who's. Thank you, Bijon. Thank you, of course, Stafford and Sean and Dan for adminning. Thank you, MC Legend 13H. Thank you, Alistair Shaw. I think I said that, but I'm not sure. I'll not say it again. And, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Darius Orlowski. Thank you, Daniel Phillips. Thank you. See if there's any. Ingenious Iron. Thank you. Thank you, New Akibu 4472. Yeah, thank you, Royal Navy Study now, as you are now, used to be KGV. And yeah. Thank you, everyone. Take care, everyone. And thank you, Mikey Newman. Thank you, everyone.